stay in work. I think that's only fair.
Order. Statement, the Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before making a statement on counter-terrorism, let me update the House about what we're doing to help address the migration crisis in Europe, and in particular, to help the thousands of refugees who are fleeing from Syria. This issue is clearly the biggest challenge facing countries across Europe today. More than 300,000 people have crossed the Mediterranean to Europe so far this year. These people came from different countries under different circumstances. Some are economic migrants in search of a better life in Europe. Many are refugees fleeing conflict, and it is vital to distinguish between the two. In recent weeks, we've seen a vast increase in the numbers arriving across the eastern Mediterranean from Turkey. More than 150,000 people have attempted that route since January. The majority of these are Syrian refugees fleeing the terror of Assad and ISIL, which has seen more than 11 million people driven from their homes. Mr. Speaker, the whole country has been deeply moved by the heartbreaking images we've seen over the past few days. And it is absolutely right that Britain should fulfil its moral responsibility to help those refugees, just as we've done so proudly throughout our history. But in doing so, we must use our head and our heart by pursuing a comprehensive approach that tackles the causes of the problem as well as the consequences. That means helping to stabilise countries where the refugees are coming from, seeking a solution to the crisis in Syria, pushing for the formation of a new unity government in Libya, busting the criminal gangs who are profiting from this human tragedy, and playing our part in saving lives in the Mediterranean, where our Royal Navy has now rescued over 6,700 people. Mr. Speaker, Britain is doing and will continue to do all of these things. We're using our aid budget to alleviate poverty and suffering in the countries from which these people are coming. We're the only major country in the world that has kept our promise to spend 0.7% of our GDP on aid. We are already the second largest bilateral donor of aid to the Syrian conflict, including providing over 18 million food rations, giving 1.6 million access to clean water, and providing education to 250,000 children. And last week we announced a further £100 million, taking our total contribution to over £1 billion. That is the UK's largest ever response to a humanitarian crisis. £60 million of this additional funding will go to help Syrians still in Syria. The rest will go to neighbouring countries, to Turkey, to Jordan, to Lebanon, where Syrian refugees now account for 1/4 of the population. And over half of this new funding will support children, with a particular priority on those who've been orphaned or separated from their families. Mr. Speaker, no other European country has come close to this level of support. Without Britain's aid to these camps, the numbers attempting the dangerous journey to Europe would be very much higher. And as my right honourable friend the Chancellor said yesterday, we'll now go much further in the spending review, significantly reshaping the way we use our aid budget to serve our national interest. We will invest even more in tackling the causes of the crisis in the Middle East and North Africa, and we'll hold much larger sums in reserve to respond to acute humanitarian crises as they happen. Turning to the question of refugees, Britain already works with the UN to deliver resettlement programmes, and we would accept thousands more under these existing schemes. We've already provided sanctuary to more than 5,000 Syrians in Britain and have introduced a specific resettlement scheme alongside those we already have to help those Syrian refugees particularly at risk. But given the scale of the crisis and the suffering of the Syrian people, it is right that we should do much more. So, Mr. Speaker, we are proposing that Britain should resettle up to 20,000 Syrian refugees over the rest of this Parliament. In doing so, we'll continue to show the world that this country is a country of extraordinary compassion, always standing up for our values and helping those in need. So, Mr. Speaker, Britain will play its part alongside our other European partners, but because we're not part of, this is important, because we're not part of the EU's borderless Schengen Agreement or its relocation initiative, Britain is able to decide its own approach. So we will continue with our approach of taking refugees from the camps and from elsewhere in Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon. This provides refugees with a more direct and safe route to the United Kingdom, rather than risking the hazardous journey to Europe, which has tragically cost so many lives. We will continue to use the established UNHCR process for identifying and resettling refugees, and when they arrive here, we'll grant them a 5-year humanitarian protection visa. And we'll significantly expand the criteria we use for our existing Syrian vulnerable persons relocation scheme. As we do so, we'll recognise that children have been particularly badly affected by the crisis in Syria. Mr. Speaker, in most cases, the interests of children are best met in the region where they can remain close to surviving family members. But in cases where the advice of the UNHCR is that their needs should be met by resettlement here in the UK, we will ensure that vulnerable children, including orphans, will be a priority. Mr. Speaker, over recent days, we've seen councils and our devolved administrations coming forward to express their willingness to do more to take Syrian refugees. This has reflected a wider generosity from families and communities across our country, and I commend in particular the Archbishop of Canterbury for the offer made by the Church of England. My right honourable friends, the Home Secretary and the Communities Secretary will now work intensively with local authorities and the devolved administrations to put in place the necessary arrangements to house and support the refugees that we resettle. And the Home Secretary will update the House on these plans next week. Finally, on this part of the statement, in full accordance with internationally agreed rules, we will ensure that the full cost of supporting thousands of Syrian refugees in the UK will be met through our aid spending for the first year, easing the burden on local communities. Mr. Speaker, this will be a truly national effort, and I know the whole House will come together in supporting these refugees in their hour of need. Now, Mr. Speaker, turning to our national security, I would like to update the House on action taken this summer to protect our country from a terrorist attack. Mr. Speaker, with the rise of ISIL, we know the terrorist threats to our country are growing. In 2014, there were 15 ISIL-related attacks around the world. This year, there have already been 150 such attacks, including the appalling tragedies in Tunisia, in which 31 Britons lost their lives. And I can tell the House that our police and security services have stopped at least 6 different attempts to attack the UK in the last 12 months alone. Mr. Speaker, the threat picture facing Britain in terms of Islamist extremist violence is more acute today than ever before. In stepping up our response to meet this threat, we've developed a comprehensive counter-terrorism strategy that seeks to prevent and disrupt plots against this country at every stage. It includes new powers to stop suspects travelling. It includes powers to enable our police and security services to apply for stronger locational constraints on those in the UK who pose a risk. It addresses the root cause of the threat, the poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism, by taking on all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. We have pursued Islamist terrorists through the courts and the criminal justice system. Since 2010, over 800 people have been arrested and 140 successfully prosecuted. And our approach includes acting overseas to tackle the threat at source, with British aircraft delivering nearly 300 airstrikes over Iraq. And our airborne intelligence and surveillance assets have assisted our coalition partners with their operations over Syria. As part of this counter-terrorism strategy, as I have said before, if there is a direct threat to the British people and we are able to stop it by taking immediate action, then as Prime Minister I will always be prepared to take that action, and that's the case whether the threat is emanating from Libya, from Syria or from anywhere else. Now, Mr. Speaker, in recent weeks it's been reported that 2 ISIL fighters of British nationality who had been plotting attacks against the UK and other countries have been killed in airstrikes. Both Junaid Hussain and Rayad Khan were British nationals based in Syria who were involved in actively recruiting ISIL sympathisers and seeking to orchestrate specific and barbaric attacks against the West, including directing a number of planned terrorist attacks right here in Britain, such as plots to attack high-profile public commemorations, including those taking place this summer. We should be under no illusion their intention was the murder of British citizens. So on this occasion, we ourselves took action. Today, I can inform the House that in an act of self-defence and after meticulous planning, Rayad Khan was killed in a precision airstrike carried out on the 21st of August by an RAF remotely piloted aircraft while he was travelling in a vehicle in the area of Raqqa in Syria. In addition to Rayad Khan, who was the target of the strike, 2 ISIL associates were also killed, one of whom, Ruhul Amin, has been identified as a UK national. They were ISIL fighters, and I can confirm there were no civilian casualties. Mr. Speaker, we took this action because there was no alternative. In this area, there's no government we can work with. We have no military on the ground to detain those preparing plots. And there was nothing to suggest that Rayad Khan would ever leave Syria or desist from his desire to murder us at home. So we had no way of preventing his planned attacks on our country without taking direct action. The US administration has also confirmed that Junaid Hussain was killed in an American airstrike on the 24th of August in Raqqa. With these issues of national security and with current prosecutions ongoing, the House will appreciate there are limits on the details I can provide. However, Mr. Speaker, let me set out for the House the legal basis for the action we took, the processes we followed, and the implications of this action on our wider strategy in countering the threat of ISIL. First, I'm clear that the action we took was entirely lawful. The Attorney General was consulted and was clear there would be a clear legal basis for action in international law. We were exercising the UK's inherent right to self-defence. There was clear evidence of the individuals in question planning and directing armed attacks against the UK. These were part of a series of actual and foiled attempts to attack the UK and our allies. And in the prevailing circumstances in Syria, the airstrike was the only feasible means of effectively disrupting the attacks planned and directed by this individual. So it was necessary and proportionate for the individual self-defence of the United Kingdom. The United Nations Charter requires members to inform the President of the Security Council of activity conducted in self-defence, and today the UK Permanent Representative will write to the President of the Security Council to do just that. Turning to the process, as I said to the House in September last year, and I quote, "It is important to reserve the right that if there were a critical British national interest at stake or there were need to act to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, you could act immediately and explain to the House of Commons afterwards." Mr. Speaker, our intelligence agencies identified the direct threat to the UK from this individual. They informed me and other senior ministers of this threat. At a meeting of the most senior members of the National Security Council, we agreed that should the right opportunity arise, then military action should be taken. The Attorney General attended the meeting and confirmed there was a legal basis for action, and on that basis the Defence Secretary authorised the operation. The strike was conducted according to specific military rules of engagement, which always comply with international law and the principles of proportionality and military necessity. The military assessed the target location and chose the optimum time to minimise the risk of civilian casualties. This was a very sensitive operation to prevent a very real threat to our country. And I've come to the House today to explain in detail what has happened and to answer questions about it. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that this strike was not part of coalition military action against ISIL in Syria. It was a targeted strike to deal with a clear, credible and specific terrorist threat to our country at home. The position with regard to the wider conflict with ISIL in Syria has not changed. As the House knows, I believe there is a strong case for the UK taking part in airstrikes as part of the international coalition to target ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq. And I believe that case only goes stronger with a growing number of terrorist plots being directed or inspired by ISIL's core leadership in Raqqa. But I've been absolutely clear that the government will return to this House for a separate vote if we propose to join coalition strikes in Syria. Mr. Speaker, my first duty as Prime Minister is to keep the British people safe. That is what I will always do. There was a terrorist directing murder on our streets and no other means to stop him. This government does not for one moment take these decisions lightly. But I'm not prepared to stand here in the aftermath of a terrorist attack on our streets and have to explain to the House why I did not take the chance to prevent it when I could have done. That is why I believe our approach is right, and I commend this statement to the House.
Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and start first by asking about the refugee crisis? When a country decides how to respond to the plight of others from outside, that's a moment when a nation becomes clear about who it is and what it stands for, and this is one such defining moment. Is our national priority to keep people out at all costs or to give sanctuary to those fleeing from their homes? Is being British to be narrow, inward-looking, fearful of the outside world, or is it about being strong and confident and proud to reach out to those seeking refuge on our shores? Mr. Speaker, it must be the latter. And can we not talk about refugees as a burden on us? Among the Syrian children we take in now will be the future consultants at our hospital bedsides, the entrepreneurs who will build our economy, the professors in our universities, and those who are amongst the strongest upholders of British values, because that has been the story of refugees to this country. Whether it's the Jewish children of the Kindertransport, the Asian families driven out of East Africa 20 years later, or the Sierra Leoneans fleeing a brutal civil war. The Prime Minister said last week that it won't help to take more refugees because it won't solve the problem in Syria, but that was a false choice. Helping those Jewish children was not part of our efforts to end the Second World War. Helping the East African families didn't bring down the brutal dictatorships in East Africa, but it was the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take more time rehearsing criticisms of the government's response to date, but I want to ask the Prime Minister about what's going to be done now. He said that this country will now accept 20,000 Syrian refugees over this Parliament. How many will it be this year? The crisis is immediate. Does that mean it's just 4,000 this year? I think we need more information on that. Will he now urgently convene local authority leaders from all around the country to hear from them what they are prepared and able to do to settle those refugees into their area and how much further they can go? Many local authorities are keen to step forward and play their part, and that is greatly to their credit. They will need additional resources, particularly at a time when they are undergoing unprecedented cuts. The government has said that they're planning to use the international aid budget for this. Will he say whether that is compliant with our commitment to 0.7%? And why, in any event, doesn't he use the reserves for this purpose? Mr. Speaker, it's not just the issue of immediate resettlement, there is also integration. Will he establish and publish a proper integration plan? The refugee crisis is not just an issue for local government or even just the Home Office, but also for transport, education, health, the Foreign Office, BIS, and the devolved authorities of Scotland and Wales. What discussions has he had with the First Minister of Scotland and the First Minister of Wales on this? And will he convene COBRA to establish a cross-governmental plan? Mr. Speaker, desperate conditions in the refugee camps are what's driving many of those who risk their lives trying to bring their families to Europe. We strongly support our aid already being provided to the refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. But it remains a concern that the Prime Minister is not coordinating his response more broadly with other European countries or with the UN. Will he reconsider his refusal to take any refugees from the southern European countries where most refugees have arrived? 50,000 have come to Greece in the course of just 1 month. These refugees too also need help. It's clear that Europe has been overwhelmed and is without a plan. So will he call for an emergency summit of EU leaders? We have a lot to learn from those countries that have already embarked on the process of resettling refugees. So will he join me in thanking Dame Glenis Willmott MEP for ensuring that this will be debated in the European Parliament this Wednesday? Turning to the government's action on counter-terrorism, no one should be in any doubt about the scale of the threat posed by ISIL. We have witnessed their brutal torture and murder of British citizens abroad and the sickening attacks they have inspired and are seeking to organise here at home. Mr. Speaker, the security services and our armed forces do immensely important work to keep us safe, a task which is difficult and dangerous, and we thank them for what they do. I thank the Prime Minister for briefing me and the Shadow Foreign Secretary this morning, which was the first time we learnt of the specific operation of the 21st of August, of which he has just informed the House. The Prime Minister has told the House today that in order to protect the safety of our citizens here at home, the government has authorised the targeting and killing of a man, a British citizen, in Syria, a country where our military force is not authorised. Will he confirm that this is the first occasion in modern times that this has been done? The Prime Minister said in his statement that there was a meeting of senior members of the National Security Council which agreed that should the right opportunity arise, then the military should take action, and that the Attorney General, who was at the meeting, confirmed that there was, and I quote, a legal basis for action. The Prime Minister has said that this is legally justifiable under the doctrine of national self-defence because the man was planning and directing armed attacks in the UK. There was no other way of stopping him, and the action was necessary and proportionate. Bearing in mind that the sufficiency of evidence as to each of these points is crucial to the justification for this action, why didn't the Attorney General authorise this specific action rather than merely, and I quote, confirming that there was a legal basis for it? Was the Attorney General's advice given or confirmed in writing, and will it be published? The Prime Minister said... The Prime Minister said in his statement that the Defence Secretary authorised the operation. Why was it not the Prime Minister himself? I want to ask him about the specific target of this attack, and inasmuch as he can disclose to the House, can he say what was it about this individual and his actions that singled him out from all that has gone before? Did he represent an ongoing threat, or was the threat based on a specific act he was plotting? Can the Prime Minister tell the House whether this action by our military is an isolated one, or is he saying that the government is likely to repeat this sort of action in the future? Above all, will he agree with me that there is a need for independent scrutiny of what the government has done here? Can I ask him to request the Counter-Terrorism Reviewer and the Intelligence and Security Committee to investigate this action, and in particular to look at the sufficiency of the evidence? Mr. Speaker, we are already engaged in the use of force against ISIL in Iraq. It is vital that the UK continue to play its part in international efforts to combat ISIL across the region. The Prime Minister said in his statement that if he proposed to join coalition strikes in Syria, he will return to this House for a vote of authorisation. Can I reiterate the position as set out by myself and the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence on the 2nd of July, namely, ISIL brutalise people, they murder people, and they are horrifically oppressive. We will carefully consider any proposals in relation to military action in Syria that the government brings forward. But we all need to be clear about what difference any action would make to our objective of defeating ISIL, about the nature of any action, its objectives, and the legal basis. And potential action must command the support of other nations in the region, including Iraq and the coalition already taking action in Syria.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her response? First of all, let me agree with her about the contribution refugees who've come to Britain have made to our country, thinking of Jewish refugees from Europe, thinking about the Ugandan Asians who made an immense contribution to our country, and I know that these people will too. Let me also agree with her that, as I said, there isn't a number of refugees you can take that will solve the problem of Syria. It's about meeting our humanitarian responsibilities and demonstrating this is a country which it is with a moral conscience and a moral way in the world, which is why we are one of the countries that's not only taking refugees, but is meeting our aid targets in a way that other major countries aren't. she asks about the 20,000 and how many we can take in this year. Obviously, we want to get on with this process. It will depend in part on how well UNHCR can do with processing people in the camps to come to the UK. Checks obviously have to be made about the people that we'll be receiving. We also want to work, as she says, very closely with local authorities, so the capacity to receive people, not just receive them, but receive them well, is in place. She asked about the aid budget and whether we were going to stick to the rules. Yes, we are. The aid rules are explicit that you can use the money in the first year receiving refugees, and I think that makes common sense apart from anything else, and so we will use that money. She asked for an integration plan. What is going to happen here is the Home Secretary and the Community Secretary will chair a committee to bring together government to make sure we do everything we can to help people across the country, and they will be looking at that issue of integration. Have we discussed this issue with First Ministers in Wales and Scotland? Yes, there has been contact. The First Minister in Scotland has made a generous offer of, I think, wanting to take 1,000 refugees into Scotland. I think now with this 20,000 figure, I think that figure will probably rise, and I welcome what the Scottish National Party are saying about that. She asked about European cooperation. I've just got off the telephone to Angela Merkel, and she was very grateful and welcomed the statement that we're making today. But let me make this point, because I think it is important. Look, Britain has a major role to play in terms of this conflict because we're the second biggest funder of these refugee camps. We're the biggest donor of aid to many of these countries. We'll be taking 20,000 refugees, but we think it makes more sense to take the refugees from the refugee camps rather than redistribute it from within Europe. Obviously, countries within the Schengen no-border system have a different set of responses, and we'll work with them. And I think it's important we show a solidarity as we do so. What we want to do is to encourage people not to make that dangerous crossing in the first place. And I think it is worth considering this. There are 11 million people who've been pushed out of their home in Syria. So far, only perhaps 3% have made that journey to Europe. And so it's important that as we act with head and heart, we help people without encouraging them to make that dangerous and potentially lethal journey. She asked about an emergency summit. Britain, France and Germany called for an emergency meeting of Home Affairs and Justice Ministers, which will take place on September the 14th. We'll be meeting as well in October. If there's a need for further meetings, we can look at that. But what's needed overall in Europe is a comprehensive plan, not just the number of refugees, but dealing with the external border, making sure other countries meet their aid obligations, and stopping the criminal gangs. Let me turn to her questions on counter-terrorism. She asked, is this the first time in modern times that a British asset has been used to conduct a strike in a country where we're not involved in a war? The answer to that is yes. Of course, Britain has used remotely piloted aircraft in Iraq and in Afghanistan, but this is a new departure, and that's why I thought it was important to come to the House and explain why I think it is necessary and justified. She asked about the legal justification. She's right to say that we believe it was necessary, proportionate. There was no other way we could have met our objectives, and all this was based on the Attorney General's advice. We don't publish the Attorney General's advice, but I'm very happy to discuss the content of that advice and describe what it was about, which was largely self-defence. She asked whether the Attorney General should take the responsibility of carrying out these strikes. I don't actually think that is the right person to carry it out. I think the way we did this, with a meeting of senior national security ministers authorised by that group, and then with the operational details left to the Defence Secretary in line with what the Attorney General said, I think that is right. A proper process was followed. She asked what was different about this person and about this case. What I would say is, I think, a relatively unique set of circumstances, but that's not to say they won't happen again, is that this person, these people, were in a part of Syria with no government, no one to work with, no other way of addressing this threat. So the choice we were left with was think this is too difficult, throw up our arms and walk away, and then wait for the chaos and terrorism to hit Britain, or take the action in the national interest and neutralise this threat. And I'm sure that was the right thing to do. She asked if we would repeat this. I would say if it is necessary to safeguard the United Kingdom and to act in self-defence, and there are no other ways of doing that, then yes, I would. She asked about scrutiny, which I think is a very good question. The reason I'm coming here today is I think it's important to be accountable in front of this House, but I'm happy to look at what other ways there may be of making sure these sorts of acts are scrutinised in the coming months and years. She finally talked about the issue about whether we should combat ISIL in Syria as we do in Iraq. I think the question for the House is if it's right to degrade and defeat ISIL in Iraq. Surely in time it is right for us to assist in the efforts already underway to defeat and degrade ISIL in Syria. There are complications, there are difficulties, and I don't want to come back to this House until we've debated it more and people have had a chance to make their views known. But I'm in no doubt ISIL and its operatives are a clear and present danger to the United Kingdom, and the sooner they're defeated and eradicated, the better.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that one of the more absurd features about the discussions on the dreadful migration crisis of recent weeks has been the suggestion by some that the problem is either caused, complicated or made worse by Britain's membership of the European Union? Does he agree these flows start through Turkey and through Libya, and they come across the continent towards Britain as one of the more popular destinations after Sweden and Germany, and they will only cease if we have more cooperation of the kind we have with the French at Calais, and not if we open up disputes with the other members of Europe? So will he continue to make a leading and positive contribution towards that comprehensive plan which he says is required to deal, amongst other things, with the appalling problems of where these people should be encouraged to go and be accommodated outside of Europe, how you take hard-headed decisions on who has to be settled for the duration of the crisis, and how that is going to be handled, and not join those governments within Europe who simply try to pretend that the problem can be pushed over to the border into a neighbouring state for the time being.
Well, my right honourable friend is certainly right about the need for a comprehensive plan, and obviously our membership of the European Union enables us to take part in the discussions and debates about what that comprehensive plan requires. And we've been particularly clear that until we get a return path for returning some migrants back to Africa, it's going to be very difficult to solve this problem. I'd also agree with him that it's right that if we were not in the European Union, the problem at Calais would not go away. Actually, we're helped by being good partners with the French and able to have our border controls on French soil. And I would commend the Home Secretary for her excellent work with the Interior Minister in France for strengthening that border. But as I say, that is actually not related to our membership of the EU. If we were out of the EU, we'd still have a problem, possibly a worse problem, of people trying to break into Britain.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his parliamentary statements, but say that it's sorry that they were not shared in advance, which is the norm. They are normally shared in advance. It's extremely disappointing and frankly unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, especially on matters of national security. Having raised the humanitarian crisis with the Prime Minister at the first PMQs of this session in June, I'm glad that there is finally the beginnings of a change in UK government thinking. It is frankly appalling that little more than 200 Syrian refugees have been taken up so far in the UK relocation scheme, and it is correct that we should be taking more. It is welcome that more will be given refuge in the UK. However, it's a shame that this is being spread through the duration of this Parliament. Will the Prime Minister tell us how many Syrian refugees will be relocated to the UK before the end of the year? We should take the opportunity to recognise the welcome that was given to refugees in countries like Germany, Austria and Sweden. Today we learned that the French government is to allow 24,000 Syrians to settle in France, while Germany is allocating £4.4 billion to support refugees. Why will the Prime Minister not work constructively with EU partners about accepting a share of the refugees in Europe at the present time? Will he make sure that he does not use the refugee issue as an excuse to revisit military intervention in Syria? And given the importance of all of these issues, will he take part in the full day's debate on the humanitarian crisis in the House of Commons this Wednesday? And finally, on counter-terrorism, when will he get round to setting up the Intelligence and Security Committee of this House?
Minister.
Taking the last question first on the ISC, I think we will be able to do that in the coming days. I'm confident of making progress with that, and I thank him for his response. But on the issue of how many Syrians Britain has already given asylum to, I think the figure is actually 5,000. And of course, under our relocation schemes and resettlement schemes we already have, that runs at about 1,000 refugees a year. And so what we're doing is now adding to that with this new scheme, which will be exclusively for Syrians, which will see the resettlement of 20,000 Syrian refugees. Now, as I said, we welcome the fact the First Minister in Scotland has offered to take 1,000. We think that'll have to be increased now with this more generous approach. He talks about working constructively within the EU. That's exactly what we are doing, and that is what lay behind my phone call with Angela Merkel just a few minutes ago. But the point I would make is we don't believe the right answer is for Britain to take people who've already arrived in Europe. We think that actually it's better to take people out of the refugee camps so we don't encourage people to take this perilous crossing. We're not part of the Schengen No Borders agreement, so we don't have to take part in their relocation scheme. We actually, but partly because of the work we're doing in the Syrian refugee camps, 10 times more money given by Britain than some other major European countries into those refugee camps, I think that entitles us to say we're taking an approach which is about helping people on the ground rather than encouraging people to move.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, the government is clearly right to increase yet further Britain's immense humanitarian support for the Syrian people, and right too to use British aid entirely in accordance with the rules governing its spending to support refugees in their first year in the United Kingdom. But will he accept that the failures of the international community to protect and to tackle the causes of the Syrian catastrophe evoke memories of the failures over the Rwandan genocide, where the international community was left guilty and shamed?
Well, first of all, can I thank him for his remarks about the use of the aid budget, which he did so much as a minister to promote and to develop. He's right to say that what we're dealing with is the consequences of failure with respect to Syria. It's an incredibly difficult situation because you've got the terrorization of people by ISIL, but also you've got Assad, who has been the recruiting sergeant for ISIL because of the butchery of his own people. What we mustn't do is give up on the idea of a transition for Syria, and we need to keep working towards that.
Sir Gerald Kaufman.
In the summer of 1939, my parents took into our home a young Jewish girl, Johanna, who had arrived in Leeds on the Kinder transport. Her sister and others had arrived on the same Kinder transport, and Neville Chamberlain facilitated the arrival of these young children more than this government is facilitating such things now. And I think it is sad that we are doing, with the government, less than Neville Chamberlain did. The Right Honourable Gentleman says that he's going to take in 20,000 refugees over 5 years. The Germans took in 10,000 on one day. What kind of comparison is that? I recognise the financial problems. I recognise the assimilation problems. But if we don't do it now, we will live to regret it for the rest of our lives. The message from my constituents in a huge postbag and in every event I attended in my constituency the weekend is, let them in. We'll welcome them. We'll do what the Germans did. Let's get on with it.
I believe the 20,000 Syrian refugees that we will take, many of whom will be children, taken directly from the Syrian refugee camps, they are the modern equivalent of the Kinder transport, and this country should be proud of that. But at the same time, let's recognise that when it comes to those Syrian refugee camps, Britain is spending more than France, more than Germany, more than Italy. When it comes to our aid budget, we all sat round that table and promised 0.7% of GDP. How many major countries have actually kept their promises? This one.
The Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend for his statement. Can I please ask him, the people that we will be letting in, can some priority be given, not just for Christians, but also for the Yazidis, who have been so poorly treated in Syria?
Minister.
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point. In drawing up the criteria, what we'll be looking at is people who are most vulnerable. And there is growing evidence that people are vulnerable not only within Syria, but some are vulnerable within the refugee camps themselves. And so Yazidis or Christians or others, particularly perhaps children or women at risk of abuse, these will all be in our scheme.
Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's a sad inevitability, perhaps, about the news that my former constituent Riyad Khan has been killed, having joined ISIL. But the House, I think, will have been surprised to find that the manner of his death has been by a drone strike against a British citizen in Syria, and therefore there'll be many questions which the House will have, and I will have as constituency MP, and his family and other MPs will have on this matter. And I'd like assurances from the Prime Minister that he'll be as forthcoming as is possible, given the security situation, with explaining the nature of the threat that this 21-year-old man was posed to the United Kingdom in the light of the action that he has outlined to the House today.
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and the way he puts it. Of course, I will be as forthcoming as I possibly can be. In this statement, I have been, and in future statements too. I am restricted because of operational sensitivities and national security reasons. The police will have informed his former constituent's family about what has happened. I would just simply say this. When we're dealing with people who are producing such a tempo of potential terrorist attacks, attacks on police, attacks on members of the armed services, attempted attacks on commemorations in our country, a tempo of potential attacks that the head of MI5 has said, is not got any recent comparative, we have to take action. And when we're dealing with people in ISIL-dominated Syria, there's no government, there's no troops on the ground, there's no other way of dealing with it than the route that we took. And I think for all those reasons, it was the right route.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend the Prime Minister on his emphasis on taking those who are in the Syrian camps? If we're to genuinely help refugees, it cannot simply be about the fittest and fastest, most able to get to Western Europe, but those left, it's sometimes the most vulnerable, left behind in the camps. And can I ask him to go further and for the United Kingdom to spearhead international efforts to create safe zones in Syria, so that those who are caught between the barbarity of Assad and the depravity of ISIL do not feel the need to flee their own country in the first place?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for what he says and the support for taking people from the camps? We have looked and will continue to look at this issue of safe zones, but of course if you're going to designate safe zones, you have to make sure they are safe, and that would involve a military commitment by Turkey, by America, potentially by Britain, and it would be a very significant commitment. But I think we should focus on what those safe zones are supposed to achieve, which is trying to keep people in their homes, keep people in their communities, and when they've left, keep them in refugee camps rather than see them making this very, very dangerous crossing to Europe. And so the thinking about safe zones is certainly the right sort of thinking.
Mr. Alistair Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, can I recognise and welcome the change in government policy in recent days and weeks? Can I say to the Prime Minister that he may no longer be talking about refugees as a swarm, though, but that there is still a lot that he can be doing to catch up with public opinion here. We should not be raiding our international development budget to pay for this. We should not be restricting our help to those who are currently in country, and we should not be resisting efforts to build a common EU position. Mr. Speaker, the people of Britain do not want to see the human misery of hundreds of thousands of people used as a political football. They want a non-partisan approach. Can I therefore suggest to the Prime Minister that he should in fact be convening a summit of the leadership of all the parties represented in this House, so that we might then construct a policy for the reaction to this crisis which will unite rather than divide our country?
Prime Minister.
Well, let me thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks. I mean, let me just make two points. I mean, first of all, we are not raiding the DFID budget. It is an acceptable and existing use of the DFID budget to pay for refugees in their first year of coming to Britain. And I think that makes good common sense. I'll resist, only partly, the temptation of pointing out, I read in my Sunday papers that apparently the Liberal Democrats wanted to cut the aid budget, but there we are. Perhaps I'll leave that one for the memoirs. Look, he talks about a common European position. Yes, we should be working towards a comprehensive approach, but we are not in the Schengen No Borders Agreement. And I think being able to maintain our border controls when others in Europe have given them up is right for Britain, and I think it's right to take the refugees out of the refugee camps rather than take part in the relocation scheme, which does always have the danger of encouraging more people to get into boats, get into dinghies and make the potentially lethal crossing across the Mediterranean.
Sir Alan Duncan.
Speaker, for every drowned baby we see on television, there are many more in the rubble of Syrian cities unseen. And for every refugee we do take, there are many more who want to come too. So given that the only long-term solution is to re-establish functioning nation-states in the region, will the Prime Minister not accept that aerial bombardment can only have a partial effect, and this needs a much greater and wider international approach to trying to solve the problem at source? What discussions are now unfolding amongst other Prime Ministers and Presidents to try and do more than just stick elastoplast on this continuing and growing problem?
No, well, my right honourable friend is entirely right that what is required, whether in Iraq or, more crucially now, in Syria, is functioning governments that can represent all of their people with armed forces that have the confidence of all of their people. That is the long-term answer to both Iraq and Syria. But we're a long way from that in Syria. He asked what conversations are going on. They are going on to try and secure a transition in Syria from the totally unacceptable regime we have today, that is the recruiting sergeant for ISIL, to a regime that can represent all of the Syrian people. But he's right in what he says.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The offer of 20,000 refugees over 5 years amounts to just 12 refugees a day. That falls pitifully short of what's needed and of what people in this country deserve and expect. Local authorities like Brighton and Hove will be very willing to accept more, provided the government fully resources it. So will he guarantee the funds not from the aid budget, and crucially that the funds will last for more than 1 year, so that the people who want to actually act to help this crisis can be enabled to do so?
Prime Minister.
Well, I noticed that Brighton very keen about being generous with other people's money. But the point is that yes, we will fund this in the first year through the DFID budget, and then we will need to look at how we provide the resources that local authorities need, and that process will be led by the Home Secretary and the Community Secretary over the coming weeks.
Sir Nicholas Soames.
I welcome the statement that my right honourable friend has made this afternoon, and would he agree that it is effectively the only way to uphold international law and to show real compassion by acting in the way that he proposes to do in the countries which are lodging the greatest number of refugees?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for his support? I mean, what we are endeavouring to do here is having a plan that demonstrates both head and heart. It's right to take refugees. It's right for us to demonstrate our humanitarian concern, to play our part. But we've got to recognise that solving the problem is going to require a lot more than that. Indeed, as I said the other day, there's no number of refugees that you can take to sort out this problem. We've got 11 million people who've been pushed out of their homes. Only 3% of those so far have come to Europe. The focus, part of the focus, must be on trying to secure the future for those 11 million and not encouraging them to get into boats and dinghies and attempt such a perilous crossing.
Mr. George Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, in welcoming the Prime Minister's statement, will he accept that the generous spirit that the British people have demonstrated in the last few days gives him a wide scope to do even more than he's proposed today? And could he give us some more indication of the numbers of refugees he proposes to take, children and other categories, in the coming months? We know He's talked about 20,000 over the course of this Parliament. But how many in the short term and medium term can he tell us about?
It's going to depend. The Home Secretary will be making a full statement next week about this, but it's going to depend on the capacity of the UNHCR to process people. It's going to depend on the capacity of councils and others to take people on. But I don't see any reason why we can't get off to a very good start and make sure that we bring people to this country and give them the genuine welcome that this country wants to.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
The Foreign Affairs Committee will tomorrow begin taking evidence on the widening of military action to Syria. But on refugees, I entirely understand his need to respond to the public mood. But he will know that every refugee brought here means many times that number can't be looked after in the region. And therefore, I believe his response is sensible and proportionate in focusing on those most in need. Will he press our European Union partners to get on the path to achieving the UN target of 0.7% of development expenditure so that agencies such as the World Food Programme and the UNHCR actually have the resources to address the consequences of this action in the region?
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point, and the 0.7% commitment is not just some sort of badge to take out and wear. It is making a real difference. The reason we've been able to be the second largest bilateral donor to the Syrian refugee camps is because the resources are available. And as I say, that is 10 times more than some other major European countries. And I met this morning with Stephen O'Brien, formerly a member of this House, now Deputy UN Secretary General with responsibility for humanitarian affairs. They are short of money in these camps. They need money for food. They need money for proper resources. And so there is a crying need for other countries to do what Britain's done and meet the promises that we made.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I asked the Prime Minister in June, he told me he was convinced our country was doing all it should to help vulnerable child refugees. And it took tragic events in August and the signatures of 500,000 British people to get him to change his mind. So, Mr. Speaker, can I ask him to change his mind again and take refugees out of his migration target?
Minister.
The point about the migration target is the Office of National Statistics has calculated migration figures in the same way for many, many years, and they include refugees as well as other migrants. I think the British public wants to know that the system as a whole is under control in terms of migration and those seeking asylum and all the rest of it. But I'm absolutely clear that we are committed to taking 20,000 Syrian refugees, and we will meet that target.
Sir William Cash.
My right honourable friend is quite right just now in emphasising the World Food Programme and also the fact that many other European countries have simply not subscribed enough. In fact, the website for the World Food Programme demonstrates that we, the United Kingdom, have given twice as much as Germany in the last year and 45% more than Germany over the past 5 years. And I think that's something else he might like to take up with Angela Merkel.
Well, look, everyone in Europe is taking action, and it's important that collectively we work together to deliver what's needed. But I do think on this issue of providing resources, not just to the World Food Programme, not just to Syrian refugee camps, but also to the countries from which these people are coming in order to try and stabilise them, there's no doubt in my mind Britain is leading the way.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Can I urge the Prime Minister, in terms of talking to the devolved administrations, to include the First Minister of Northern Ireland, because there is a strong desire on the part of the people of Northern Ireland to play their fair and proportionate role in taking refugees. And that's been very clear from the outpouring of compassion right across the community in all parts of Northern Ireland. Can I say that the Prime Minister is right to say that refugees should come from the camps? He's also right to point out the difference between economic migrants and genuine refugees. And on the issue of intervention possibly in Syria militarily, it's one thing to talk about targeted, clearly defined action against Daesh. It's quite another to talk in the wide, indiscriminate terms that was being talked about in television at the weekend.
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his support for taking migrants from the refugee camps, and can I also take him up on his offer, and I'll make sure conversations are had with the First Minister to see what role Northern Ireland can play in this.
Mr. John Redwood.
I strongly support the Prime Minister's view that our help to Syrian refugees must be given close to the borders of Syria, and we shouldn't encourage people to undertake hazardous journeys using people traffickers. That is cruel. But would he also confirm that on the unrelated topic of economic migrants, more will need to be done to honour the very serious promises we made to the British people?
Minister.
Yeah, I think my right honourable friend makes an important point, which is that there are a number of people who are fleeing the appalling conflicts who we need to find a home for. But clearly there are people who've been crossing the Mediterranean, particularly through the Libya Central Mediterranean route, who are economic migrants coming in search of a better life. And part of the comprehensive approach Europe needs is to make sure there is a way of breaking the link between getting on a boat in Libya and getting settlement rights in Europe. All the cases going back through history where countries have had huge problems with this, you've needed to have some breakage of that link in order to discourage people from making the trip if they're not refugees.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the Interior Ministers Summit next Monday, will Britain now sign up to be part of a European-wide response to assist refugees from all parts of the world and ensure they have somewhere safe to go? And Britain will play a much greater role in it does at the present time, including sorting out the misery and desperation of people living in those camps in Calais and other places. They are human beings too who need some help and support. And if I may add to this, say anything about the welcome remarks made by the Foreign Secretary during his visit to Tehran, in which he indicated that because of the new relationship with Iran, there was a possibility of a wider political involvement in bringing about some degree of progress, possibly even a solution to the desperate crisis facing Syria, of a summit of all the nations of that region, plus, of course, Britain, the USA and Russia.
Well, first of all, let me say to the honourable gentleman, we don't believe it's right to take part in the European relocation quota, because we think a better answer for Britain, which is such a major investor into these refugee camps, is to take people directly from the camps, because in that way we won't be encouraging more people to take this perilous journey. But where I would say Britain is absolutely fulfilling our moral responsibility is if you take a long-term view and look at the asylum seekers we've taken, look at the people that we've resettled from around the world here, we absolutely play our part. In terms of his question about Iran, of course there is an opportunity for greater dialogue with Iran. Now this nuclear deal, which I think is a good deal, has been done, but I think Britain should enter into this in a very cautious and sceptical way. We ought to remember that Iran is still a supporter of terrorist organisations like Hamas and Hezbollah, which I know he describes as friends, but I see very much as enemies. And also, we need to make sure that Iran is playing a positive role in Syria, rather than the role it is now of propping up the hated Assad regime.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
My right honourable friends for Sutton, Coalfield and North Somerset have both raised the possibility of safe havens in Syria itself to stem the flow of refugees at source. If this is to work, it would require a United Nations mandate, and that would require the support of Russia. Does the government recognise that by remaining fixated on removing Assad, that puts a bar on any solution of this sort? And will the government make up its mind that the main threat to our interest is Daesh? And if so, then we can proceed to have a genuinely international coalition and agreement against that main threat.
I respect very much my honourable friend's views, but on this occasion I don't agree with them on two grounds. One is, I don't think it's right to look at Syria and say that we have to choose between ISIL or Assad. I think it would be a great mistake to think, well, because Assad is perhaps the lesser of two evils, we should back him. Assad is one of the chief recruiting sergeants for ISIL because of the butchery of his own people. I also believe, look, I don't think there is a proposal that's workable for safe havens as we stand today, but it has been possible in past times to make that intervention to try and keep people safe. and if you were acting to try and alleviate humanitarian emergency, you could act in that way. The problem with safe havens is it would require a large military intervention, and a large military intervention that I don't believe is currently the right answer.
Does Mina Ahmed Sheikh?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like most members here over the past few days, I've been inundated with messages of sympathy and support for those suffering as a result of this humanitarian crisis unfolding in Europe. And let us remember that no parent would place their child on water unless they thought that was still safer than being on land. Would the Prime Minister join with me in praising the work carried out by local and national groups, such as Scotland Supporting Refugees, who have demonstrated leadership where this government has fallen so woefully short, and provided information to members of the public who want to directly support those affected by this desperate situation?
Minister. Let me agree with her in commending the many great voluntary and charitable bodies that are going to be helping with the national welcome that we're going to be giving to 20,000 refugees from Syria.
Sir Gerald Howarth.
May I commend the Prime Minister on his very measured and reasonable response, in response sometimes to a hysterical clamour for something to be done without a specific plan for what that should be. But can I tell him that in Aldershot we do not have any spare accommodation? I've spoken to my local authority this morning. They have no assets. The private rented market is completely saturated. That is the reality there. But can I say to my right honourable friend, my right honourable friend for New Forest East was absolutely right, that if we are to deliver what the Prime Minister called for, a comprehensive solution, then we need to resolve the problem in Syria. And unless we engage with Russia, which has made it absolutely crystal clear they will not resign from their support for Assad, unless we get everybody round the table, regional leaders, the Americans and ourselves, I commend the Prime Minister with a job to do, and I think he'll do it brilliantly.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? Look, he's right that resolving the problem in Syria is going to take engagement with all of the parties that he mentioned. The argument I would make to the Russians is that nobody benefits from the immense boost that's being given to Islamist extremist violence by what is happening in Syria, and Russia in time will feel the pain of that just as we feel the pain of that. So I think there are some common interests. He's right to say that as well as showing the heart of welcoming people to our country, we now need to go through all the practicalities of making sure we can give people a very good welcome.
Mr. Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome, however belated and inadequate, the Prime Minister's statement, and also the action being taken against Daesh military terrorist planners. However, isn't it a fact that the vast majority of Syrians who have had to flee their homes have been driven out by the action of the Assad regime, and that Assad continues to barrel bomb civilian populations? What is our government doing, along with other governments, to get a no-fly zone over those areas to protect those Syrian civilians?
Minister. The honourable gentleman is absolutely right to draw the House's attention to the fact that President Assad and his forces are still using chemical weapons against their own people, and there have been a number of occasions when barrel bombs have been used. I came to this House after seeing pictures of dead children gassed by Assad and suggested that we took military action. The House didn't agree on that occasion, but I hope when it comes to future discussions we'll think very carefully about our national interests and how to keep this country safe, how to defeat terrorism, how to give the people of Syria the chance of a better future.
Sir Eric Pickles.
The Prime Minister is quite right to concentrate on the plight of children. I think it is within the spirit of the Kinder Transport that is doing so. And I think it's also right to concentrate on looking to those people who are in the camps in Syria. But of course, children don't take the dangerous journey. They accompany their parents, and if they are separated or orphaned thousands of miles from home, they are peculiarly vulnerable. could my right honourable friend tell us about the discussions tell the House the discussions he's had with international and European partners to identify these children quickly and to see that they are resettled in the region or elsewhere?
No, well, I think my right honourable friend is absolutely right to draw attention to the issue of children, and one of the priority groups of the 20,000 that we'll be taking will be children. We have to be very careful here because a lot of the expert groups advise that there's a danger in taking children away from potential other family members and groups, but I'm sure there are many orphan children and children at risk who we could welcome here. We've also looked at the proposal by Save the Children about the 3,000 children already here in Europe, and we'll continue to discuss that with them. But again, major international organisations like UNHCR advise caution on relocating unaccompanied children. So we should be guided by the evidence as we make these very difficult decisions.
Mr. David Winnick.
In view of the crisis of the last few weeks, should not Germany be warmly congratulated for its act of humanity? And in many respects, Germany has acted as the conscience of the European Union and indeed of Europe as a whole. And when he next meets the Hungarian Prime Minister, no doubt he will he express our contempt for the remarks made by that creature and tell him that what is required is humanity, and it doesn't matter a damn whether the people who are trying to save their lives and their children are Muslims or not. It's totally irrelevant.
Minister. Where I agree with the honourable gentleman is that we shouldn't be taking into account someone's religion. We don't do that in our asylum processes when we welcome people and resettle people in what is, and let's be proud of it, one of the most successful multiracial, multi-ethnic democracies anywhere on earth. I think we have to show some understanding of the difficulties that the Schengen countries themselves have got, because of course once people cross one external frontier into Europe, there isn't really then another border unless perhaps they come to Calais. So there are stresses and strains within the Schengen system, and as working with them as partners, we're not going to join the Schengen system, we're going to keep our borders, we're not going to take part in the relocation scheme that they have, but we do need to show some understanding of the problems they have and perhaps help them with, for instance, the external frontier to Europe, which is causing so many difficulties at the moment.
Mr. Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very well remember when the Prime Minister came to this House to ask for authority to take action against President Assad. This Parliament decided to block him in that quest and has allowed President Assad to ethnically cleanse his own country. Does he agree with me that his job in preventing Assad's genocide is now much more difficult than it was 2 years ago when he first proposed these measures?
Minister. Grateful for what my honourable friend says. Look, we have to deal now, though, with the situation that faces us. No one is arguing that military action is the only answer to this problem. We need a comprehensive solution, but at the end of the day, I'm sure that the removal of ISIL from Syria will be in this nation's interest.
Order. There is naturally huge interest in this subject, and I'm keen as far as possible to accommodate it, but there is a pressure upon time. In appealing for brevity, perhaps I can look to that versatile thespian, Mr. Stephen Pound.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House is grateful to the Prime Minister for the statement he's made in responding to an absolutely unique outpouring of sympathy tempered with horror from the nation, if I may say, very well articulated by the Shadow Home Secretary. But he is now talking about 5,000 travel documents to be issued to 5 million people in Lebanon and Jordan alone. What criteria, Mr. Speaker, will be used to make this dreadful Sophie's choice? Will it be the UNHCR, or will he, as I would hope, actually make use of the religious leaders, particularly amongst the Assyrian Christian community, in the camps to help him in this terrible, difficult task?
In the interest of brevity, it will be the UNHCR, but we should look at vulnerable groups that could include Yazidis and Christians and others who, on some occasions, can face dangers in the camps themselves.
Chris Heaton-Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I thank you for facilitating the organisation of the vigil that we had in Westminster Hall earlier today. I welcome the statement. I'm very, very pleased that we are doing more. But when welcoming Syrian refugees to our shores, how can we ensure that we do not inadvertently reward those who traffic vulnerable people for financial gain?
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point. One of the ways to make sure the criminal gangs aren't benefiting is to take people out of the camps rather than to take people who've arrived in Europe, because tragically many of them are being inveigled into using these criminal gangs who benefit when this trade in people increases.
Mr. Keith Vaz.
Can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement and remind him that it was the Ugandan agents arriving in Leicester that so transformed that city. I agree with him that direct recruitment should be from the camps. However, there will be exceptional cases of people who've arrived in Europe, some of whom I've met in Calais, who have ties with the United Kingdom, who may need to be processed, who've already arrived in mainland Europe. Would he look at those cases? But in particular, would he please stress on the EU the need to support Europol? Here is the organisation best placed to deal with the criminal gangs and Daesh, and we do need to give them more support.
Now, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right about Europol, and we are putting investment in and working with them very closely. We're also putting NCA officials, National Criminal Agency officers, into the operations in Sicily and elsewhere to break up the criminal gangs. I would, though, be very cautious about what he suggests with Calais. Anything that suggests that Calais is going to become a processing centre for people to come to the United Kingdom would simply make the situation there worse. We need to explain to people, if you come to Calais, if you try to get through the tunnel, that is not the way you're going to get to the United Kingdom. That's what all the security and the defence is about, and we should keep it up.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having seen at first hand the work of DFID officials helping refugees from Daesh in their camps, can the Prime Minister confirm that there will be no reduction in that effort now that we're welcoming more to this country with DFID funds? I'm sure that was the implication of what my right honourable friend, Member for Sutton Coldfield, had to say, because I think the whole House will agree that we should all be proud of what those officials are doing and have been doing over many years.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We will continue to invest in these refugee camps. £1 billion has gone in already. We'll keep up that investment, but by taking people from the camps, and that is the right answer for Britain, the right answer for those people, and of course we'll release some of the capacity of those camps, because at the moment they are under huge amounts of pressure, not just budgetary pressure, but people pressure as well.
Mr. Barry Gardner.
Sorry. The Prime Minister has said that Britain will take in 20,000 refugees over the next 5 years. But he has paradoxically said that we will not accept them as refugees. They will not be given refugee status. He said they would be given status as under humanitarian protection. And as he knows, that is a discretionary leave which does not entitle them to settlement. These are people who desperately need security and stability in their lives. How is the Prime Minister going to reconcile that with the status that he's proposing to give them?
It's a very good question. There are two reasons for taking this approach. One is that by granting the humanitarian passport, as it were, they don't have to formally go through asylum procedures to prove that they are refugees. We're taking them once they've met the criteria, then they have the right to stay. Of course, at the end of those 5 years, some may choose to return to Syria, but many will want to stay here and apply for settlement rights, which of course they'll be able to do.
Victoria Atkins.
The acting leader of the opposition rightly referred to the contributions that refugees have made throughout history to this country and the hopes for the children that we will welcome now. But ultimately, Syria will need its best and its brightest. And isn't it right that by investing in refugee camps in the region, we help, I hope, Syria rebuild itself in the future, as well as looking after people in the immediate vicinity?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'll repeat this figure about 11 million people taken out of their homes. You know, all our interests in those people going back to their homes. That obviously needs a solution to the Syrian crisis, but that is the right answer rather than an even bigger movement of people.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We welcome the statement from the Prime Minister, but in the Prime Minister talking about 11 million people in the camps in Syria and the impossibility of moving them and investing in them, does that not suggest that actually The policy should be the opposite. Help with the crisis of the people who are on the streets in Europe and fund the camps to protect and keep the people on the border and in the region of Syria.
We are funding the camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey. The point about the 11 million I'm trying to make is that given that so far only 3% of the 11 million have moved to Europe, we have to be careful not to create an incentive that 3% becomes 10% or 20%, because that would completely overwhelm the capacity even of the most generous state like Germany to receive people. That's why investing in the refugee camps, helping people, not just those in the camps outside Syria, but working with UN agencies about how to help people inside Syria, which I was discussing with Stephen O'Brien this morning, that's so important to try and stop the scale of the movement, but to save lives at the same time.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Both parts of his statement and the agencies for the intelligence-led operation of the 21st of August. Would he agree with me that the mark of a truly altruistic and compassionate society can't be measured in the numbers of tens of thousands of fit and able young men it accommodates, but rather the number of people who are truly vulnerable, women and children, the elderly and the sick?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, and that is why we're working with the UNHCR on the categories of people we'll be taking from the camps.
Mr. Benny Sherman.
Speaker, can I remind the Prime Minister that so many of us in this chamber are quite closely, if we look at our ancestry, to migrants and refugees. In my own case, hounded out of France by the Catholics, because my ancestors were Huguenot Protestants. But most of us in this chamber will come from that sort of background. And isn't the case the generosity of spirit that's been shown by the British people we must build on? I don't think that the Prime Minister has gone far enough yet. I hope he will go further. But all of us must realise none of us have clean hands, and many of us are so responsible for the instability of the Middle East that's caused this in the first place.
Where I agree with the honourable gentleman is the British public are very generous. They want to see us resettle refugees, and they don't see any conflict, and neither do I, between resettling refugees and playing our humanitarian part, but also having a well-managed and well-controlled immigration system. They want both things, and we must deliver both things.
Mr. Philip Davis.
The facts of the matter are that those refugees who have already made it into the EU are already safe, and we can't make them any safer. Not all people coming in are genuine refugees, and we're already taking hundreds of thousands of migrants into the UK every year, which we're struggling to cope with, and I haven't heard anybody else that they should be distributed on a quota system around the rest of the EU. Can I therefore urge the Prime Minister to have regard to the silent majority in this country and base his decisions on common sense and being practical, and not based on the affliction of so many other politicians, which is some kind of emotional craving to be seen as compassionate, irrespective of the practicalities of the situation?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his remarks. I think the point he makes is important about those that have already made it to Europe are, to some degree or other, far safer and less at risk than those still stuck in Syria or in very precarious positions, sometimes in refugee camps or on the borders of them. And I think it is right we consider that in our response.
Anne Clwyd.
I think it's ironic that it's taken the photograph of one little boy washed up on a beach to focus world attention. This has been going on for months, if not years. Thousands of people have already drowned. But that one little boy has certainly focused attention. And I think that our response, while welcome, is not sufficient. No. If one person in my constituency could ring up today when I was driving up in the car and say, I've got places for 20 families. And the local authority, my own local authority, which is a poor local authority, has already offered places for 20 families. Now, that little boy came from Kobani. Kobani was liberated by the Syrian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds. And it wasn't by us, but that little boy's family, of course, father, has gone back to Kobani. We owe people like that something more. And I would hope that this country and its individuals will show the way. I hope the government will follow.
I think the Honourable Lady is right to draw attention to the connection between what happens in Kobani with the liberation of that town by Kurdish forces and the opportunity for people to return. There is a connection between what happens on the ground in Syria militarily and this refugee crisis. The second point I make is that Britain's generosity on this issue didn't start 5 minutes, 5 days or 5 weeks ago. Our generosity started with our decision to pursue 0.7% of GDP for aid, even at a time of austerity, and our decision to be the second largest bilateral aid donor to those Syrian refugee camps, only beaten by the United States of America. More than Germany, more than France, many times more than most other major European countries. And this money is a measure of our compassion and sympathy because it saved many, many lives.
Jonathan Ginogly.
For clarification, Mr. Speaker, am I right in thinking that my right honourable friend is saying that in the event of the destruction of Daesh, the flow of refugees from Syria is unlikely to recede unless we also see the end of Assad's regime?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I mean, it's difficult to get precise figures, but a number of people have left Syria because of Assad's brutality. A number of people have left because of ISIL's brutality. And that is why the movement of refugees has been so great. And that's why I think it's wrong to say we need to choose between two evils. We need to get rid of both of them.
Tom Brake.
Does the Prime Minister agree that our priority in relation to Syria should be working with other Arab countries and Iran, Russia, France and Germany to find a coherent response to the fighting in the region, not repeating the mistakes of the Iraq War, a war opposed by the Liberal Democrats and following the US government into bombing and then occupying an Arab country?
I think what we should do is work with other countries. We should work according to international law, but that shouldn't stop us from getting on and doing some of the necessary things that we've done, including the counter-terrorism action I referred to earlier.
Mr. Stuart Jackson.
I congratulate my right honourable friend on a proportionate, measured approach in the national interest, and it's a shame that the Her Majesty's opposition didn't take a similar approach when Syria was debated in a substantive motion 2 years ago, when their behaviour was duplicitous, to be the most charitable. Can I take him back to the issue, the tragedy within the humanitarian disaster in this situation, which is systematic Christian persecution over many years? Notwithstanding his earlier answers, in designing the refugee settlement regime and the mechanics of it, will he take into account the systematic persecution of Christians which has existed for many years?
Well, we will certainly look at this. I think, as I said, we should be looking at vulnerable groups, and that can include Yazidis, Christians and others who are vulnerable not just in Syria right now, but also potentially vulnerable in the situations they find themselves outside Syria.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There could not be a starker contrast between the overwhelming majority of young people in my own constituency and that of my honourable friend, the member for Cardiff West, who utterly condemn the activities of Daesh and the actions of Riyad Khan, and regrettably the two individuals from my own constituency that he associated with who also travelled to fight in Syria. Clearly, the Prime Minister and his ministers have difficult decisions to take in circumstances when there is a threat to this country. Would he meet with myself and the member for Cardiff West to discuss the circumstances and the nature of what's happened, but also, most importantly, to discuss what we can do better together to tackle the extremists who are trying to recruit those individuals from our own shores to prevent further young people from getting involved with this barbarous organisation?
Certainly it is a matter of huge regret when young people from our constituencies get involved in extremism and then violence and then potentially travel to Syria or Iraq and take part in these dreadful events. Perhaps what I'll do is consult with the Defence Secretary and see whether he could host a meeting with MPs who've got particular concerns to raise.
Steve Brine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will welcome warmly what the Prime Minister has said today. They do care that we are generous, and I know they will do their bit if they can. The Prime Minister spoke of causes right at the start of his statement, and there's no question the exodus from Syria is down to the chaos that reigns in that country at the moment. There's lots of talk of moral obligations in my post bag over the last few weeks, and can I ask the Prime Minister, does this country have a moral obligation to join the military coalition operating in Syria?
I think we have an obligation to act in such a way that will reduce the pressure on these people, and that will further our national interests and make us more safe. And so we have to debate and discuss in this House not only how many refugees we should take and what we're doing in terms of humanitarian aid, but we do need to have a discussion about what we can do to help degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL. There's no doubt that the ISIL fanatics are dedicated on doing us harm, and so therefore it's right what we're doing in Iraq, it's right we support the action others are taking in Syria, and we need to debate about whether we should do more to help that.
Mr. Ian Lucas.
In January, the Prime Minister committed to taking 500 refugees from Syria under the Vulnerable Relocation Programme. Why is it that only 217 are actually here, despite the 150,000 people going from Turkey to Western Europe that he described?
In total, we've given refuge to around 5,000 Syrians, and we also have a resettlement programme, which we've had for many years, that resettles around 1,000 people a year, including Syrians. In addition to that, there's the specific vulnerable peoples programme, which we're now going to be massively expanding.
Lucy Fraser.
Mr. Speaker, my great-grandparents, some time ago, made a long journey over land and sea and became refugees in England, so I understand, as much as anybody, the importance of Britain giving refugees a home. But once we have welcomed those here, those who need to come here, we must ensure that they have the tools to live a decent life, integrated in our communities. Is the Prime Minister satisfied the investment they are making for the long-term future of these refugees will be sufficient?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point, which is giving someone asylum, giving someone that refugee status, is not an act that's just completed with a piece of paper. It's an act that has to be completed with a warm welcome. We've got to say to these people, you'll be welcome in our communities, your children will be welcome at our schools, you'll be welcome to use our hospitals. These people will be able to work to take jobs in Britain. They'll have all of those rights. It's very important we make sure the welcome is warm and well organised, which is why I think the scale that we're looking at is about right.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister must be aware that there has been a sharp rise in crimes against Muslims and anti-Muslim sentiment in the UK and Europe. Can he assure me, that as Prime Minister of this country, that religion will not be a criteria to grant humanitarian relief? And can he resist the temptation of using Islamic terrorism? It is not Islamic, it's just pure terrorism.
Well, she's absolutely right that we should not take people on the basis of their faith. We should be taking people on the basis of whether they're being persecuted. I describe it as extremist Islamist terrorism because I think simply to say what we're facing from ISIL and others is terrorism is not a proper description of what we're facing. And look, the religion of Islam is a religion of peace. The overwhelming majority of Muslims want to condemn and do daily condemn these fanatics. But the fact is the fanatics themselves self-identify as Muslims. And that is why it's so important that British Muslim communities, as they do, stand up and condemn them and say, you're not acting in the name of our great religion, you're perverting it. But simply to try and pretend the problem doesn't exist by just calling it terrorism, I don't think will work.
Sir Edward Lee.
The Prime Minister defended the action recently against ISIL on the basis of specific intelligence and specific targeting. When it comes to our debate that we're going to have on bombing Syria, may I commend this approach? Because I think there are many of us who want to be reassured that we do have a specific intelligence-based approach and not just a generalised one of bombing our enemy's enemy.
My honourable friend makes a good point. It is a difficult balance trying to explain the information we do have, but without endangering national security or operations that may be underway. So all I would say is we will always try to provide the best and most up-to-date intelligence information in a format that people can find reliable. But, you know, as Prime Ministers have found before, this is very, very difficult water to go through.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, our country has a long and honourable tradition of asylum, and we warmly welcome those who will come to our shores, to Birmingham, as they did to Berlin. Leadership is key at the time of the greatest refugee crisis since the war. so too is the tone that leadership sets. Can the Prime Minister assure the House, therefore, that there'll be no more talk of swarms of marauding migrants when there are hundreds of thousands of people who are fleeing for their lives?
I think what matters is the action that we take to demonstrate the humanity and moral conscience of Britain, and that's what we're doing today.
Mr. Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do not recognise the boundaries of Syria, and therefore any Russian intervention would be to support the Assad regime alone. On that basis, can my right honourable friend assure the House that we will carry on supporting the countries that surround Libya, surround Syria, such as Lebanon and Jordan, who are taking in the refugees?
I can certainly give that assurance. If you look at the scale of movement of people into, for instance, Lebanon, it now accounts for about a quarter of the Lebanese population. So we do give a lot of money to that country to help with refugees, and we should continue to do so, because it is better for people to stay there, to be looked after there, and in time to return to Syria, than, as I've said, to make the perilous journey to Europe.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The city of Liverpool has a very proud tradition of welcoming those fleeing from oppression, and we stand ready to welcome refugees from Syria. I know, though, from the hundreds of pieces of correspondence that I've received in recent weeks from my constituents, that they, like I, will be bitterly disappointed by the lack of ambition from the Prime Minister today. Can I ask him, when we have the statement from the Home Secretary next week, how quickly after that can we expect the British programme to start?
The British programme can get underway straight away. We need to talk to UNHCR to make sure they can process the people out of the camps. But I think 20,000 Syrian refugees is a generous and correct approach for Britain to take.
Sir Edward Garnier.
The refugee and terrorism crisis which the Prime Minister has described, and if I may say so, the military event that took place in August was both lawful and right, for what it's worth, suggests to me that we need not just a diplomatic and an aid, but also a defence solution. Will my right honourable friend please urge the Strategic Defence Review to look very carefully at increasing our defence budget during the course of the next year or so, because we're surely going to need it?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point about the defence budget. That's why we've recommitted to 2% throughout this decade. That will see a real terms increase in our defence budget, and I believe that an important part of that must be making sure we have these counter-terrorism capabilities, such as the one that we used in August.
Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you very much. The Prime Minister rightly said today that he doesn't want to see people making these dangerous crossings of the Mediterranean. Now, the Swedish academic Professor Hans Rosling has identified an EU directive on aviation that is forcing this to happen at 4 times the cost of flying, helping criminal gangs grow, and also the risk of drowning, as we saw with that young boy last week. So will you look at the possibility at the European directive, at the European Union, of suspending that directive for a while on the routes that these people are using, so they don't have to make these crossings at the risk of losing their lives?
Certainly look at the suggestion in the academic that he quotes.
Mr. Andrew Tyree.
Part of the humanitarian crisis derives from regional instability caused by the Iraq War. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement because we bear a particular responsibility for it. Does the Prime Minister agree that the US, which contributes only half as much as the UK in Syrian aid as a proportion of GDP, and which has accepted scarcely any asylum seekers at all, should now also respond and do more? And will he ask the US administration to do so?
I obviously look forward to discussing this with President Obama. Let's be fair, they are the largest aid donor to Syria, and I'm sure that we'll go on encouraging them and others to do more, just as we've kept the promise we made about the 0.7%.
Mr. David Lammy.
I welcome what the Prime Minister has said today, but he will know that when Turkey invaded Cyprus, we took 50,000 Cypriots. During Idi Amin's reign in Uganda, we took 30,000 Asian Ugandans. we took over 20,000 Vietnamese boat people in a short space of time. Why has he limited his help for the Syrians to 4,000 a year?
Well, what we've said is 20,000 refugees, which I think is actually the right response for Britain. We want to make sure that we're able to give these people a home and a welcome, that we have the capacity to do that. Britain, obviously, every year takes asylum seekers from right around the world. I think last year we had some 25,000 applications. We've got a large number of people from Eritrea and other countries trying to make their way to Britain and claim asylum. I think if you look at our record over a 10 to 20 year period in terms of the asylum claims we take here in Britain, it shows that we are a generous country that operates the system properly, and I think 20,000 Syrian refugees is about right.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the children of Syria are the victims of dictators, terrorists and traffickers, and are certainly not the victims of UK immigration policy, and therefore I very much commend and support my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister's statement today. Can he say what discussions have been had with countries such as Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in terms of greater aid in terms of taking refugees and support for those refugee camps around Syria?
My honourable friend makes an important point. We have had those discussions. We'll continue to do so. The Arab world has provided some generous funding in terms of refugee camps, but I'm sure we'll have further conversations with them.
The British people, as the Prime Minister said, are indeed a generous people, and they will find his proposal of 4,000 Syrian refugees a year derisory. But above all, long after this refugee crisis is no longer on the front pages, there will be a need for a sustainable European-wide strategy. It cannot be right, for instance, that Greece and Italy are left alone to try and deal with incoming migrants coming across the Mediterranean. It cannot be right that we refuse to take our quota. And this is not just an issue of Syrian refugees. There are migrants from the Horn of Africa and North Africa drowning every day in the Mediterranean. The Prime Minister needs to look to a more sustainable and a strategy that is more genuinely working closely with our European neighbours. Hundreds and thousands of lives depend on it.
Well, I don't agree with the honourable lady. I mean, first of all, I think 20,000 Syrian refugees is the right response for Britain. But also, while I would agree we need a coordinated European response, I don't believe that should be Britain giving up our borders and joining the Schengen no borders arrangement. And I think that lies behind what she and others are suggesting. Well, if that's not the case, I think the party opposite need to be very clear about this, because I think actually we can have a comprehensive approach that helps those Schengen countries with their external borders, but maintains our borders and recognises that we benefit from having that.
Mr. Simon Hoare.
My right honourable friend's decision to spread the 20,000 over the lifetime of this Parliament seems to me a sensible one, but it also doesn't come without any risks, namely the opportunity for those who wish our country ill to try to infiltrate those camps to see if they too can get themselves to the UK under this programme. Can the Prime Minister assure the House and the country that robust but sensitive, where it's appropriate, vetting and security procedures will be in place from day one until the end?
Certainly give that assurance. It's very important that we select those people who are genuinely vulnerable, who need to be saved, and we're very, very careful that we don't accept people who may have support for extremist or terrorist views.
Durkan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constraints mean that I have to park questions about the deployment of lethal force against a UK citizen to address the refugee crisis. The Prime Minister talked of supporting these refugees in their hour of need. How does that rhetoric rhyme with 20,000 being admitted over the course of 5 years and the overtones of disqualification against those who have already made perilous journeys and perhaps lost loved ones? Will the Prime Minister go further than just having his ministers have disparate conversations with First Ministers and, along with the Irish Government, convene a special meeting of the British-Irish Council to properly coordinate the response for refugees across all the administrations of these islands, taking account of their different service models, and being able to offer good partnership to international agencies and domestic charities who so want to help.
Well, I look carefully at what the honourable gentleman said. I mean, obviously what the Republic of Ireland does is a matter for the Republic of Ireland if they want to opt into the relocation system. But I'm pretty confident that 20,000 refugees coming to Britain is and will be seen to be by other European countries a generous and compassionate offer that will help to take the pressure off other European countries.
Mr. Oliver Dowden.
May I welcome the Prime Minister's willingness to use the aid budget for exactly what it was intended, helping people in crisis right now, and will he ensure that as the aid budget continues to grow thanks to our strong economy, he retains that flexibility to use it for similar crises in the future?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. You know, the aid budget is there to help the vulnerable, the weak, the poorest in our world, the most vulnerable in our world, and that should include the first-year costs of people coming to our country who are giving refuge and asylum to. And yes, we will go on making sure, this will be part of the spending review, making sure that the aid budget is addressing some of the causes of instability and insecurity in our world, because that's a way of stopping some of these problems before they happen.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a few weeks, it is the first anniversary of the murder of my constituent, Alan Henning, by ISIL. Alan gave his life to get through vital aid to Syrian children. But as we saw last week, those Syrian children are still in desperate need of refuge and support. It is in the scale and lack of immediacy that my constituents in Eccles and Worsley will be disappointed by the government's response today. They want to see a more immediate response, and they want to see a more generous offer to Syrian refugees. Will he think again?
I would say to the Honourable Lady, this response is immediate and it is generous. It will be starting straight away, working with UNHCR, taking people into our country, as we have been up to now, and giving them a warm welcome.
Mr. David Burrows.
And the increasing number of refugees. But on the issue of timing, given that only 216 vulnerable Syrian refugees have been relocated via VPR, can the Prime Minister assure me that the expanded programme will happen quicker, so that for those thousands of refugees over the course of this Parliament, it won't be desperately too late for them?
Honourable friend, that assurance.
Jenny Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the 1990s, families in Darlington welcomed Bosnian refugees into their homes, and it's a credit to them that they are willing to do so again. Our voluntary sector is already collecting toys and clothes. They know what to do. The local authority is on board. What they don't know, and they're trying to plan, and the success of this will be greatly assisted by an ability to plan properly, they have no idea about when this is going to happen. He said straight away, we need more than straight away. We need to know, are we talking days, weeks? What do you mean?
As I said, the Home Secretary will be making a statement next week, setting out more detail about how the scheme will work and how we'll be working with local councils to deliver it.
Mr. James Morris.
The Prime Minister is absolutely right to focus on long-term solutions to this problem, but would he agree with me that we do have to face the reality that in order to really solve this problem, we need to consider more concerted military action across Iraq and Syria, working with our allies, and we're not going to be able to avoid having that debate and coming to a resolution like this?
Well, I think my honourable friend is right that in order to solve this problem, we need to see an end to ISIL in Iraq and Syria. This is a terrorist state. This is a state that terrorises its people, that throws gay people off buildings, that terrorises women. And no wonder people are fleeing from it. And it is unthinkable, in my view, that we'll ever see a solution to the problems in Syria and Iraq while ISIL still exists. Now, the role we play at the moment, we're helping those who are doing the direct military action while providing military action in Iraq. But of course, we have to discuss and debate in this House if we're going to go further.
Dr. Ely Whiteford.
Mr. Speaker, in recent days, a number of people have been in touch with me asking how they personally can extend accommodation, support and friendship to refugees fleeing the conflict in Syria. I wonder what consideration the government has given to how they will harness this tremendous generosity of individuals, of churches and of community groups so that we can really take advantage of that massive generosity where the government has been so tardy.
I think, apart from that last bit, I think the Honourable Lady was making a very good point, which is we will make sure that local councils and through the devolved administrations, that the scheme we come up with local councils enables voluntary groups and others that want to volunteer to try and harness their enthusiasm.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome my right honourable friend's statement. What more can be done to encourage Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar to play a greater role? And will the Prime Minister join me in praising the Kurdistan regional government, who are currently supporting 1.8 million Syrian refugees and other displaced people currently in northern Iraq in various refugee camps?
I certainly join my honourable friend in praising the KRG for the work they're doing. Not only looking after people, but also combating ISIL. We'll go on talking to Saudi Arabia and other countries about the support we can all give together to these refugee camps.
Donald.
Mr. Speaker, just now, even an 18-year-old Syrian girl isolated in Lebanon, Jordan or Turkey would not normally be eligible under family reunion rules to join her refugee parents in the United Kingdom, potentially pushing her towards people smugglers. Will the Prime Minister undertake to look again urgently at the scope of the family reunion rules and also at overcoming the difficulties highlighted by organisations such as Red Cross that many people face in attempting to make such applications at British embassies in that region?
I'll ask the Home Secretary to look specifically at the point he raises and write to him.
Craig Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome hearing the Prime Minister reiterating the huge contribution of Britain, not just over the last few weeks, but over the last several years to help ease the burden of the Syrian refugees. Can I ask the Prime Minister if he is able to elaborate on whether discussions are going on with European counterparts on how jointly we tackle and stop these murderous people traffickers at source?
My honourable friend's absolutely right to highlight this. We are working with other European partners, particularly through this operations centre in Sicily, where we're bringing our expertise in combating the people traffickers, and there is a European action that we're part of underway.
Does he agree that there are great advantages to both local community and to refugees if they're located evenly, proportionately throughout the kingdom? And does he know that in the fine city of Newport we successfully host 459 asylum seekers? Cardiff has more than 900, but the constituency of the Chancellor has only 2, the Home Secretary has only 5, and the Prime Minister has none. How many of the 20,000 will be relocated to his constituency?
Well, that's going to be a matter for the discussions chaired by the Home Secretary and the Community Secretary to make sure that the whole country can come together to give these people a welcome.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You get fit in this job, don't you? Well, there's been a lot of debate this afternoon about the numbers, and that's rightly so, actually, because to maintain this goodwill that we've all spoken about in our communities, that number has to be right. I'm interested in the how and the when. How can we feed in ideas that our own constituencies have? For example, in South Cambridgeshire, we have an empty, fully functioning barracks in Bassingbourn. Many of my constituents have suggested this could be a good idea. How do we feed this in?
My honourable friend makes an excellent suggestion. The point of this committee, chaired by the Home Secretary and the Community Secretary, will be to take into account what local authorities can do, what voluntary bodies, what charities can do, but also to listen to suggestions of honourable members as well.
Chris Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, can I make the Prime Minister aware that during the summer I visited the British Red Cross office in Glasgow, where a constituent, a Syrian refugee, whose brother was in Athens, had kidney failure, and that gentleman required to go to Athens in the Home Office, get granted asylum after representations from myself. These issues probably highlight in this crisis that there will be issues of family reunion and issues where a family relative will have to go to another part of Europe or vice versa for issues of organ donation. Can I ask him to look at those issues very sensitively indeed?
One of his colleagues raised the issue of family reunion, which we obviously look at in the context of this. The rules we have are there for a good reason, but I know the Immigration Minister has taken careful note of what he said.
Mr. David Tredinnick.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend aware of the remarks of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, who's pointed out that the UN camps have hardly any Christians in them because the Islamists have driven them out? And will he take special steps to address the issue of Christians who are not in the UN camps?
My honourable makes a good point, which is why I referred earlier to the point that we will take people who are vulnerable, and that could include, for instance, Yazidis or indeed Christians who, because of their religious beliefs, haven't only been persecuted in Syria, but sometimes have found life difficult in the camps as well.
Where's Streeting?
Because this afternoon the Prime Minister has unhelpfully conflated membership and signing up to the Schengen Agreement with taking part in a proactive way in a proper coordinated pan-European response. Why did he continue to unhelpfully muddy these waters? And can he now give a clear explanation as to why it is, beyond the opinions of his rabid Eurosceptic backbenchers, that he is not engaging properly with our partners in Europe?
We are engaging, and what we're doing in taking 20,000 people and the immense funding of the refugee camps will take the pressure off other European countries. The point I simply make, and I'm not conflating the two, if you're part of Schengen, you've taken away all your internal border controls across Europe and you maintain your external border. So obviously the Schengen countries therefore have to come together to work out what they are going to do with this migration crisis. Now, we can be part of that. We help to fund Frontex. We help to secure the external border. We're helping break up the criminal gangs. But we haven't decided to take our borders down as they have, so we're not in the same position. I'm not conflating the two. It's a really important point.
Johnny Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister and warmly welcome his statement this afternoon, and take this opportunity to pay tribute to the operators and those who endure what we ask them to in order to execute these strikes. Would he agree with me? We now have to go ahead and really win this argument about dealing with ISIS. We have seen the tragic events over the last few weeks, months in fact, but we must now use that momentum to push ahead, win this debate and deal with the core cause of this in ISIS and President Assad.
I commend my honourable friend for what he's written and said about this, and thank him for what he said just now. Look, I believe we will benefit if ISIL is degraded in Iraq and Syria. We're taking active part in Iraq. We're helping in Syria. The question is, should we go further? Now, I feel that one of the problems of the last debate is, and many colleagues on both sides of the House said to me, I simply felt I couldn't vote for this action against Assad and chemical weapons because of what happened over Iraq. Now, I totally understand that, but we've got to now get over that and recognise that as a country it's in our interest for ISIL to be degraded and ultimately destroyed. We're playing a proud part. I'd like us to do more. Let's separate this from the issue of the Iraq war and act in our national interest now with partners to get rid of this dreadful terrorist organisation.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 10 years, Hull has taken many refugees under the Home Office's Gateway programme, and they've been successfully resettled. Over the weekend at the Freedom Festival, nearly 1,200 people signed the petition established by Sue Hubbard to get more support for the Syrian refugees. A few months ago, Hull offered to help take more Syrians into Hull. The Home Office dragged its feet and nothing happened. So what assurance can the Prime Minister give me that now Hull's very good offer will actually be taken up by this government?
Well, I can certainly give her that assurance. I mean, the Gateway and other schemes she talks about resettle effectively around 1,000 people in Britain every year. In addition to that, there are the successful asylum applications. I think 11,000 were successful last year. And in addition to that, we'll now be taking 20,000 Syrian refugees. So I think that is a generous...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is widespread support for the Prime Minister's generous decision to take 20,000 refugees. But last year alone, we took 183,000 economic migrants from the European Union. And I just wonder whether this is proportionate, or whether we couldn't be more generous to refugees if we were less obsessed by the free movement of people.
Well, what I'd say to my honourable friend is that the ability to move in Europe and take a job is something that many of our own citizens enjoy, going to live in another country. What we should be addressing is the additional pull factor welfare system that can give people some 12 or 13,000 euros a year in their first year of coming to Britain. I think that would ensure that we have the free movement to work, which is important, but not artificially inflated by our own welfare system.
Neil Griffith.
Mr. Speaker. Well, the Prime Minister has mentioned the 5-year protection visa. Can he give assurances that people who have that visa will A, be allowed to work, B, be allowed to travel, and that there will be an automatic assumption to extend their rights to proper resettlement rights, should they so wish?
The basic answer to all those questions is yes.
Mr. Peter Aldous.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The International Chamber of Shipping, the UK Chamber of Shipping and their respective members are doing their best to assist with the rescue of refugees and migrants at sea. However, there's a pressing need for the UK and the other EU countries to work with those in Africa and the Middle East to deal directly with people smugglers. My right honourable friend has outlined the work that has been done in this regard in his answer to my honourable friend from Calder Valley. But can I urge him to leave no stone unturned to eliminate this wicked and cruel practice?
I certainly take on board what my honourable friend says. You know, at the heart of this is a problem with people smugglers and these criminal gangs, and we must crack them.
Chris Law.
The Prime Minister has stated today's decision of accepting 20,000 refugees in the UK over 5 years is one made in both the head and the heart. Well, my head says that's only 6 refugees per constituency per year, a total of 30 per constituency over 5 years. In the last month, I've had literally dozens of offers from constituents in Dundee West, and I'm sure I'm echoing for the whole of this chamber who have also had the same. Why do we need to wait 5 years? Can we not get on with it now? Now we have the crisis in our hands, and act urgently and compassionately.
We are getting on with it now, and in the letter she wrote me, the First Minister in Scotland said that Scotland would be willing to take 1,000. Well, they're going to have to reassess that. Now we're taking 20,000 as a country. I'll be able to write back and say that Scotland will be able to do more.
Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
By announcing that their borders are open to all the migrants who can get to them, Germany and Sweden have inadvertently increased the demand for migration across a continent, increased the human misery. Will the Prime Minister assure the House that the UK will not make this mistake, that we will not do the wrong thing, even if it is for the right reasons?
What I say to my honourable friend is I think, as I said, we must act with head and heart, and that's why we think it's right to take people from the refugee camps.
Order. I keep spotting people who I didn't think were here at the start of the statement, but they're all people of the very highest integrity. So I just leave people to self-regulate, if I can put it that way. If they were here at the start, they are welcome to take part, and if they weren't, they aren't. Mrs. Madeline Moon.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister started speaking, I felt really proud. Britain was going to take 20,000. I really did. And then we were told it's going to be over 5 years. And I have to say, my heart sank. My constituency of Bridgend, my local council, have said, despite 50 million in cuts over 5 years, that they will take in 10 families. We cannot, for many of these families, wait 5 years to offer them a home. Their need is now. Why can't we move the 20,000 and start taking people now and have a regular statement from the Prime Minister telling us how many have come so that we can get a sense of movement, get a sense that we are going to take our 20,000, and certainly before 5 years is up.
On with it.
Just very gently say to the House, the Prime Minister is giving very succinct replies, and I think it's not unreasonable that we should have succinct questions to which he can respond. Mr. David Rapley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps are being taken to warn President Putin about the implications of his plans to further support the Assad regime? It will only lead to the expansion of Islamic terrorism. It's bad news for the Middle East, it's bad news for the UK, and it's bad news for Russia.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We do need to continue these discussions with the Russians. As I've said, in the long run, the growth of Islamist extremist violence is bad for Russia just as it's bad for the United Kingdom.
Patrick Grady.
I think it's quite worrying that he's using a crisis situation to announce a major reshaping of aid policy, which many people would say should meet humanitarian need rather than a narrow definition of national interest. In confirming that use of aid will meet current OECD guidelines, can he also tell us what thought he's already given to providing support outside of the aid budget and beyond the first 12 months of resettlement?
Well, obviously we'll start with the use of the aid budget, which covers the first year, and then this committee, to be chaired by the Home Secretary and Community Secretary, will look at what more needs to be done to make sure these people can be properly looked after.
Mr Jeremy Lefroy.
Mr Speaker, can I warmly thank the Prime Minister for his decision, and would he join me in thanking, alongside the Kurdish regional government, the people of Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq and Turkey and other countries that have taken in millions, supported by the UK and other countries over the past 4 years?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to praise those countries. They have borne a huge burden in terms of the people that they've taken in and looked after, and we must go on supporting them in the work they do.
Let's go.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What criteria has the Prime Minister used to arrive at a figure of just 6 refugees per constituency per year? And in the light of the compassionate acts of constituents, will he review that figure?
Well, I believe that 20,000 Syrian refugees is a generous and correct figure for Britain. I think what we should do now is get on with it, to move as rapidly as we can to process those people. It does take time, because we have to work with the UNHCR to go through people in the camps and find suitable people to come here. It takes time also to work with local councils. I don't want to make a pledge that we then can't deliver properly on the ground, and I believe this 20,000 pledge can properly be delivered.
Mr Oliver Colville.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, Plymouth is a dispersal centre for asylum seekers. So could my right honourable friend, when he knows what the figures are, let Plymouth MPs and Plymouth City Council know as to how many people that they've got to help with? And we also make sure there's going to be health screening so that we can actually sort out whether people have got TB or not, which is an important issue in my patch.
I'm sure all these issues will be looked at by the Home Secretary's Committee.
Holland.
Speaker, in the 1840s and 1850s, Yorkshire solicitor Thomas Constable was estimated to have saved about 500 lives from refugees fleeing the appalling humanitarian disaster on Ghouta Moor. Now that the Prime Minister has recognised this properly as a refugee crisis, can he give the assurance that he and all his ministers in the government will give the leadership to ensure we keep the nation together in our actions to deal with this and not let those who might seek to use this to divide and for political gain?
Yes, I can certainly give that assurance, and I think the whole country will recognise, and political leaders should recognise, this is a good approach we can all work with.
Graham Evans.
Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's statement, and the whole House welcomes the £1 billion of British taxpayers' money that is being committed to humanitarian aid in and around Syria. Does my right honourable friend agree with me, though, that the French and Germans need to match that commitment and more? And is not Germany's open door policy a green light to the human traffickers who are directly responsible for so much human tragedy in the Mediterranean?
Well, every country must take its own approach and justify that to its parliament and its people. I do think that the money we spend in Syrian refugee camps is hugely important, because it not only saves lives, but it also gives people the chance of security and safety without having to make some perilous journey.
Mr Ian Blackford.
The mark of a civilised society is how we deal with the humanitarian crisis. All of us have had full postbags over the course of the last few weeks, and people have reflected on the human misery and suffering that's taken place. People in my constituency will reflect on the paucity of the response in the United Kingdom. When we see Germany taking 10,000 people a day, as we have done, to talk about 20,000 people over 5 years is inexcusable. This government should be ashamed of itself. What is the capacity that we have? We've talked about the capacity to take people in. What is the real capacity for us to take real action in this country and deal with the humanitarian crisis?
As I said, I think taking 20,000 people is the right response for the United Kingdom, and I think we should come together and work out how best local councils and local voluntary groups can give these people a warm welcome.
Mr Raymond Chishti.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has said that thinking of safe havens is the right sort of thinking. On the 28th of November 2011, I then asked the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, can we have safe havens for the protection of civilians at that time? And he said to me there is no imminent plans for safe havens. Can I ask the Prime Minister, why do we not push harder for safe havens at the time? Which countries objected at that time? What is the timeline for these safe havens so people can be protected on their doorsteps from Assad and Daesh?
Let me be clear about what I was saying. I don't want to mislead anybody. I was saying safe havens is the right sort of thinking because it's thinking addressed at trying to help people in the region rather than encouraging people to travel. The problem with safe havens up to now, and I think it's still a problem, is that if you're going to declare a safe haven, and our experience in Bosnia and elsewhere is very relevant here, if you're going to declare a safe haven, it must be safe. So if you're going to make that haven safe, you then have to commit a lot of troops, potentially air support, take out Syrian air defences, a whole series of steps would have to be taken. So we're a long way away from that. The only point I was trying to make is to show some sympathy with those people pursuing the safe havens idea, that they are at least trying to look at how to help people in the region rather than encouraging this trade in people.
Mr. Andrew Gwynn.
The Prime Minister set out the action that he intends to take in and around Syria and also here at home. He's also been very clear about not becoming involved in the EU quota system. Given that, and given the very real pressure being faced by those countries on the front line, in particular Greece and Italy, is there any assistance that the United Kingdom can give to Greece and Italy in the processing of those applications and helping the refugees in those countries?
Yes, we can and we do. We help them with the capacity in terms of fingerprinting and sorting people, because that's part of the problem at the moment in the Schengen system, is that people coming to Greece and Italy are just then transiting onwards rather than doing what ought to happen, which is to take their details so they make asylum applications in the first country they arrive in. We are helping with that, and that's part of the problem that Schengen is coping with at the moment.
Tom Tugendhat.
My right honourable friend's comments on the generosity of the British people through the aid budget. It's extremely welcome to see that as the second biggest donor we are finally getting recognised for the efforts that we've made alongside the Turks, the Lebanese and Jordanians and Iraqis. Can I now urge him to work with our regional and indeed our NATO partner in the area to do more, not only financially but also militarily, because they are capable, they have got the troops and they have got the weapons that they can do more.
I certainly look carefully at what he says. I think today we're talking about the humanitarian response, and the issues he raises are perhaps for later.
Neil Gray.
Speaker, I think it's worth reminding the House that we're not talking about migrants, we're talking about refugees and, for that matter, human beings. Why did it take the tragic and gut-wrenching image of poor wee Aylan Kurdi to shame him into finally taking the action that he has announced today? My constituents, and very limited action, my constituents in Airdrie and Shotts demand more.
Well, I'll tell you the action this government and this country has taken, meeting the 0.7% of GDP on our aid budget, where no other major country in the world has done it. That has saved countless lives, and I think this country can be proud of that. So before we listen to all these lectures about acting too late, it was this government that put the money into the refugee camps, this government that sorted out the 0.7% of GDP, and this government that is now saying we should take 20,000 Syrian refugees.
Chloe Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's move today, and I welcome the generous spirit shown by my constituents and others around the country. I wonder if the Prime Minister has considered the other part of our humanitarian recent history from this House, which is the Modern Slavery Act, which was passed this year, and the measures in that Act against transport and trafficking, whether he thinks there are links that can be made.
I think my honourable friend makes a very good point. It's a key part of our work against these criminal gangs, and it's one that increasing numbers of countries are looking at the legislation passed here and seeing if they can imitate it.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
It's exactly a month since I wrote to his minister to ask why the Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme was failing for refugees from Syria and why it had not been extended to Iraq. I've had no reply. I hope his statement today will begin to answer the first part, but what about the second? What difference, given that his conflation of the military threat from Daesh in Iraq and in Syria, is there between refugees from Daesh in Syria and in Iraq?
Well, the difference is that, of course, in Iraq there is at least a government that governs part of that country, and there are safe spaces to go in that country, whereas, of course, in Syria you're caught between the horrors of ISIL and the terrors of Assad.
Tom Pursglove.
Mr. Speaker, what assurances can my right honourable friend give to the British people that
Islamic State terrorists posing as refugees will not be inadvertently permitted into our country, and what assessment has been made of that risk?
Obviously, we'll take great care over this issue and make sure that there's a proper security screening of people who are coming.
Christian Matheson.
Would the Prime Minister concede that perhaps the government has been a little bit slow out of the traps in responding to this crisis? Perhaps because ministers are a little bit befuddled by an artificial debate that conflates economic migrants with refugees, that conflates, indeed, economic migrants with the European Union debate that his honourable members are having? And would the Prime Minister also care to comment on the editorial policy of newspapers that deliberately include provocative articles by deliberately provocative writers that say it's absolutely fine to send gunboats to stop refugees and then change their position straight away when pictures of little dead boys are washed up on the beach?
No, I think the government was right to reach 0.7%, right to be the leading aid donor in Europe to the Syrian refugee camps, and now is right to take 20,000 Syrian refugees.
Hugh Merriman.
Speaker, I welcome the compassion and safe harbour afforded by this government to Syrian refugees. I also welcome the statement from the Prime Minister on the isolated military action taken by this government. And can I ask the Prime Minister to agree with me that whilst the UK remains at risk from dissident terrorists, our constituents would not forgive us if we failed in our ultimate duty to keep them safe, no matter how difficult the circumstances?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Keeping the country safe is the first duty of government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has made repeated reference to how much effort this country has put into the refugee crisis over the past months. But back in June, my honourable friend Thangam Debonair set down an early day motion regarding Operation Mare Nostrum. And that operation was estimated to have saved the lives of 500,000 refugees in the Mediterranean area. The government cancelled that, saying that it was a pull factor. Do you regret cancelling it, and is it time to reinstate it?
Well, 28 member states made that decision about Mare Nostrum, but actually what we then did in response to the growing numbers that were still coming across the Mediterranean was to deploy the flagship of the Royal Navy, again, Britain acting rapidly and saving 6,700 lives.
Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Prime Minister on his proportionate, humane and timely response to this crisis, which has escalated at a rapid pace. Prior to coming to this place, I defended the Home Secretary in asylum and immigration cases in court, and I saw firsthand how considerable progress was made on dealing with the asylum backlog. We inherited over 100,000 asylum cases from the last Labour administration. What measures have been put in place and resources at the Home Office to deal with the additional burden so that robust and legitimate decision-making is ensured?
Well, I look forward to the House having the benefit of my honourable friend's wisdom from pursuing all those cases. It means that when she speaks in these debates, she has real knowledge about what these cases are like. Look, with these Syrian refugees, I think it's very important they're given these humanitarian passports so they don't have to go through the lengthy asylum process, which is why we're taking that approach.
Al Williams.
In a reply to me last month, the Immigration Minister said the Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme was designed to focus on need rather than meeting a quota. Is the Prime Minister now imposing a quota on that scheme of 20,000? And what will he say to the 20,001st person who has a provable and legitimate need?
Good question. I think, first of all, let's get on and deliver the 20,000, I think is the first thing to do.
Gareth Johnson.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the downside of the opposition's suggestion that we actually take refugees from mainland Europe is that it gives a green light to people smugglers and can actually encourage exploitation? Mr. Speaker, we have a good record in this country from this government of tackling modern slavery and tackling human traffic, and it would be wrong at this stage to turn our back on the genuine progress that we've made.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for what he says. Look, we had a choice, because we're not part of Schengen, about how to design our programme, and we've taken the decision that it's better to take people from the camps, and I think that is a good and humane decision, and that will help others be able to use those camps, and it won't encourage people to make that perilous journey.
Jamie Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's statement completely fails to realise either the scale or the urgency of the humanitarian crisis that faces us, but it also fails to recognise the huge well of generosity that is out in our country at the moment. There's people in every one of our constituencies that are desperate to help. If the Prime Minister wants a moment for his big society, this is it. Will the Prime Minister come back to this House tomorrow with a statement that recognises not only the scale of the catastrophe that faces the Syrian people, but also the huge desire there is in our constituencies to help them? And let's do more to help these people. We really could have a statement to be proud of.
People will respond very positively to the idea of giving a warm and thorough welcome to 20,000 people coming to our country. And I think now we should get into the business of making sure we can implement it rapidly, get local councils on side, local groups on side, make sure everyone works together, and let's find a really warm and good welcome for these 20,000 people.
Helen Waitley.
As the Prime Minister has pointed out, the vast majority of refugees are in camps near Syria, and I welcome his long-term commitment to substantial aid for these people. Could my right honourable friend advise whether a share of this aid can be used to help refugees develop the skills which will be needed to rebuild Syria in due course, since everything possible needs to be done to bring about a durable peace when eventually military conflict ends?
I can absolutely say to my honourable friend that can happen. We can use aid money for building capacity of countries and using people returning to those countries when they're able to do just that.
Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that most fair-minded people in this country will not regard this proposal as a proper response to the situation which we face. To suggest that we will take 4,000 people a year over the next 5 years and give them sanctuary when we are in the midst of the largest global refugee crisis since the Second World War is woefully inadequate, and I think we should be ashamed of not doing more. And I also think that the distinction between people in the refugee camps and already in Europe is quite spurious. There's been references to the little boy who was washed up on the shores of Turkey. What if that little boy hadn't drowned? And what if his parents had applied to this country for refuge and sanctuary? Would we say, no, our doors are closed to them?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with the honourable gentleman. I think that 20,000 is the right response. I think it's a good response that everyone can now get behind and work with. In terms of people who've made it already to Europe, those people are in many cases in a far better situation, a much safer situation than the people still stuck in Syria or stuck in the refugee camps. And that is why it's those people that our effort will be directed towards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I commend the Prime Minister on giving children in particular a priority today, especially orphans, in today's statement. We've had heart-rending pictures and stories about children, and I've been contacted by so many of my constituents about this, all reiterating that we must be humanitarian as children are our future. Please can the Prime Minister reiterate his assurances that we will do our very best for these orphans and children?
Yes, we certainly will. And of course, we're going to be looking in the people we take from the camp specifically at orphans and vulnerable children. And they will require a particular amount of care and attention, coming from miles away to a strange country, and to make sure that they have all the care and love that they need as they grow up.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, I've also been inundated with offers of support from constituents in Oldham and Saddleworth. But could I ask the Prime Minister how he's going to speed up the asylum process? It currently can take many months, if not years, and many refugees have very specific skills which are in short supply in the country. I have a family of engineers from Syria who want to work and currently have been in the country a few years. And can he also confirm, will he be publishing the Attorney General guidance around the legal basis for the killing of a UK citizen so that this House can scrutinise the decision-making?
On the second issue, no, we don't publish the advice of the Attorney General. No government has done that. What we did in the case in Libya is describe the legal case, and I'm very happy to do that and describe the legal advice, which is based on self-defence, as I set out in my statement. On the asylum system, yes, of course we want to speed it up, and we have sped it up, and that's why we've dealt with so much of the backlog and why we've introduced things like suspensions of appeals, where people can continue to appeal once they've been returned to the country they've come from. We'll continue to do that. But let me stress, these 20,000 Syrians, they're not going to have to go through some lengthy asylum process. They are going to be helped from those camps to a life in Britain, and let us say today that we're going to give them a warm and friendly and joyous welcome.
Order. I thank the Prime Minister, the party leaders who questioned him, and the 102 backbenchers who have done so. Order. I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, to make an application for leave to propose a debate on a specific and important matter that should have urgent consideration under the terms of Standing Order number 24. The Right Honourable Lady has up to 3 minutes in which to make such an application. I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the light of the Prime Minister's statement, I wish to propose the House should debate a specific and important matter should have urgent consideration, namely the refugee crisis in Europe. The number of people standing to ask questions has, I think, shown the strength of feeling and interest that there is in this House, and most in the House have welcomed the government's decision to take more refugees directly from the camps near Syria, and also welcomed the government's aid to the region, where it is ahead of every other country and is making an extremely important contribution. He is right, too, that the issues in the camps are serious, with the lack of schooling for thousands of people and also the cut in rations, meaning that there are desperate conditions and we should help. But the response in the Chamber today has raised two significant concerns with the Prime Minister's response. First, on the scale of response, the 20,000 people that he will help over 5 years, and second, on the lack of help for refugees who have already fled into Europe. The Interior Ministers are meeting on the 14th, and the crisis is still escalating. It is not just the tragic scenes that we have seen of Aylan Kurdi and others who have drowned, the families who are ready to walk from Hungary to Austria to find safe home. But this is also about our chance to discuss the number that the Prime Minister has offered to help. 20,000 over 5 years could mean 4,000 a year. The Kinder transport took 10,000 children in the space of 9 months. I would urge the Prime Minister to reconsider and to look at what more we are able to do with councils, with communities across the country who have come forward asking to help and do more. He has rightly changed his mind already in response to the public concern. I ask him to do so again, and for the opportunity for this House to persuade him to do so, given the urgent need of those for help and given the importance of this debate. And secondly, I would ask the Prime Minister to consider again helping those who are in Europe and who need help at the moment. He has said he does not want to encourage people to travel. I would say to him, they are travelling already. They are not waiting for a response from the British government. And in particular, those in Greece need particular help and particular humanitarian aid. There are many people being helped through Hungary and through Austria already, but in Greece there are thousands who are desperate for help. We could do more. We have the chance to be part of working with European countries, putting pressure on them to do more. The Prime Minister has responded in part to what is now the greatest humanitarian crisis since the Second World War. I urge him to do so again and for us to have the chance to debate this tomorrow and then again on Wednesday.
Order. I will come to the Honourable Gentleman's point of order, but I do think in terms of procedural tidiness we should deal with the matter that is before the House. I've listened carefully to the application from the Right Honourable Member, and I am satisfied that the matter raised by her is proper to be discussed under Standing Order number 24. Has the Right Honourable Member the leave of the House? The Right Honourable Member has obtained the leave of the House. The debate, I'm grateful. The debate will be held tomorrow, Tuesday, the 8th of September, as the first item of public business. The debate will last for up to 3 hours and will arise on a motion that the House has considered the specified matter set out in the Right Honourable Member's application. We will leave that matter there for now, but I come now, of course, to points of order. I hope the honourable gentleman, if I will accept if I say age before something. The right honourable gentleman, the father of the House. Point of order, Sir Gerald Corkman.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to raise with you on a point of order the contempt towards this House by the Home Office as evidenced by the treatment of a case which I wrote about to the Home Secretary last month. The constituent came to see me and told me that she had moved into my constituency, gave me her old address and gave me her new address. I then immediately wrote to the Home Secretary on August the 17th. I didn't expect a reply from her because she's only sent me one letter in 5 years. But I did think that it might be passed down to a junior minister. Instead, I got an undated letter from UK Visas and Immigration, the email date on that being August the 25th, saying, according to our records, Ms Smith is currently residing at 25 Thruxton Close. Therefore, Ms Smith is not residing in your constituency. She is residing in my constituency. I wrote to this person, J. Hughes, I wrote to this person saying that if he had not replied to me by last week, I would raise this matter in the House. He's not replied to me still. I will not be treated like dirt by the Home Office. But more important than me being treated like dirt is my constituents being treated like dirt. What can be done about it?
Well, can I say to the Father of the House that I think that he is the means, almost always, including today, of his own salvation. There were occasions in the last Parliament when the Right Honourable Gentleman had occasion to bring to my attention his dissatisfaction that he had not received a reply from a minister, and I think on more than one occasion he received a reply from someone who did not exist. A name on a piece of paper, but a name of someone who did not exist. Look, these are not matters in which the Chair ordinarily becomes involved. I have the highest regard for the courtesy the Home Secretary has always shown me, and ordinarily, I must say, has shown the House. I think it is much easier to respect the traditions and courtesies and to err on the side of speed of response, and, if I may say so, also to err on the side of acknowledging a very, very senior, long-serving member who has made an approach. I don't think there will be a division of the House, or even any great objection from the Right Honourable Gentleman, if I say that he's not always the easiest colleague to please. But he has a right to represent his constituents and to be treated with the utmost courtesy. I'm sorry if he feels he hasn't been, and I know the Home Secretary will do her best with her ministerial team to accommodate his various requests and periodically his demands, as I think she says from a sedentary position she does. Let's leave it there for today, but the Right Honourable Gentleman's not been in the House for 45 years for no reason. Point of order, Mr Stephen Pound.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and after those words I must be very, very careful in what I say. But earlier on today, you quite rightly amended business on Wednesday for special recognition of Her Majesty's anniversary. May I say that, unfortunately, one consequence of that is that Welsh business then moves to the following week, and Northern Ireland business, which we would have considered on that day, sadly falls. As these are dark and desperate days in Northern Ireland, and it is very, very important that this House does actually debate and question ministers, is there any mechanism whereby the timetable could be further amended so that we could include Northern Ireland questions before the following session of Parliament?
Not readily, no. However, there are various means by which members can secure the presence of ministers if important matters arise on which those members wish to probe. And the honourable gentleman is an experienced denizen of this House, and he will be well familiar with those mechanisms. He may even, from time to time, have used them himself. I will come to the right honourable gentleman, but I've been saving up the precious commodity of Mr. Pete Wishart. Let's hear from the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, I think all of us are grateful that we'll have this extra 3 hours to debate the refugee crisis. But the Labour Party knew that we were giving our opposition day to discuss the refugee crisis. And why the Labour Party knew that is because they requested that we made the whole day about the refugee crisis. Mr. Speaker, this is such an important issue that we cannot play party politics with this. This cannot be a feature of the Labour leadership contest, and the House deserves much better than this, Mr. Speaker. Can you make a ruling that our debate will still stand, Mr. Speaker? There will be a substantive motion to discuss and debate this issue, and the House will be able to consider that.
I can't hear order. Forgive me, there was quite a lot of commotion, and therefore I missed the last sentence or so of what the honourable gentleman was saying. I do need to hear it.
Speaker, I just want you to confirm that on Wednesday it will still be in order for the Scottish National Party to bring a cross-party motion to agree to discuss and debate the refugee crisis on a substantive issue, and we should stop playing games with something as important as the refugee crisis. It is better than any feature of the Labour Party leadership contest.
Order. Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, I thank him for his point of order, and I appreciate his patience in waiting to be called. It will be entirely orderly for the honourable gentleman or his party so to table. As Speaker, my responsibility is simply to hear an application and to judge whether it has merit, rather than to become embroiled in what might be considered to be competitions between parties. But he's asked me a straight question, will it be orderly? And the answer is yes. And that seems to satisfy not only the honourable gentleman, but very importantly, and I mean this, very importantly, the honourable member for Shipley to boot.
Can we boot the honourable member?
No. And the Shadow Home Secretary. And then I will come to Mr. Dodds.
Just further to that point of order, Mr. Speaker, I'm very saddened by the SNP's response, as I think it would be very important. It's very important that all of us who want to debate this should be able to do so tomorrow and also on Wednesday as well. On Wednesday, we will have the opportunity to discuss a motion and an opportunity to vote. That will be immensely important. I would just urge honourable members on the benches to just pause for a second and to remember what the gravity is of the issue that we are discussing, and to make sure that all of us in this House are able to unite around helping thousands of people, and rather than debating the timing of the motions.
Notwithstanding what's just been said, one thing I can say which will command agreement, because it has the advantage of being factually true, is that there will be a debate under Standing Order 24 tomorrow, as a result of the successful application by the Shadow Home Secretary, and there will be a debate on these matters in terms they choose, led by the Scottish National Party on Wednesday. That is the factual position, and I thank colleagues for what they've said. Now, very patiently, the right honourable gentleman has been waiting. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, and further to the point of order raised by the honourable member for Ely North, can I support entirely what he said? Given the grave events in Northern Ireland, it is the wrong time for Northern Ireland questions not to happen. Can I ask, Mr. Speaker, whether you have had any communication from a minister indicating that there will be time provided in government time to allow some kind of debate on the situation in Northern Ireland in these 2 weeks when Parliament is sitting, because it will be too late when we come back in October?
There may well be such an opportunity for a number of reasons, though I cannot guarantee it. First, it is possible that, having heard the right honourable gentleman speaking with the authority of his office, and having heard what has been said by the honourable member for Ealing North, the government may choose to provide such a debate. That is one possibility. Another is a debate courtesy of the Backbench Business Committee, and a third possibility, depending upon the nature of the circumstances and their urgency or otherwise, a debate under Standing Order number 24. So there are opportunities, and the Honourable Gentleman was very experienced, and I know he'll keep an eye on the situation, and I will be very sensitive to the legitimate claims that colleagues might have in these circumstances. I hope that's fair. And if the Minister wants to say anything, he's most welcome. Secretary of State wants to say anything? No, not on this occasion. Okay, thank you. Right, I think we can now genuinely move on. Sorry? We come now to the European Union Referendum Bill Programme number 2 motion. The Minister to move.
Move formally, sir.
Thank you. The question is the European Union Referendum Bill Programme number 2 motion as on the order paper. As many as other opinions say aye. Sorry? Mr. Salmond, were you seeking to catch my eye?
I'm seeking to oppose the programme motion, but
does the right honourable gentleman wish to make a speech or simply to vote against? Funny that, turning up in the House of Commons to make a speech. It will be a pleasure to hear the right honourable gentleman. Mr. Alex Salmond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but I always think that marginally it's to my advantage to speak when I'm trying to persuade honourable members to support my cause. Many people have argued to the contrary that silence could be golden under these circumstances. But looking at this programme motion, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that the government should succeed. For two reasons. It's only, 6 weeks since we were here discussing the European referendum bill, and I understand, of course, the anxiety of the government to progress the business while the Labour Party have been concerned about other matters. But looking at what's in the order paper before us, it strikes me as is hardly adequate in terms of a reasonable discussion. Those of us who were here during the committee stage will remember that among many other things that happened, there was a last-minute drafting starred amendment that was allowed in terms of the timing of the referendum. We'll remember that the government were facing defeat on the issue of Purdah, and we'll also remember the absolute confidence of which the Leader of the House, indeed the Minister and the government front bench, told us that the question which was to be put in the referendum was already more or less accepted by the Electoral Commission, and we didn't have to worry about the process of that. Now we come to the report stage, and we find that we're going to have 2.5 hours to debate the issue of Purdah. We find that a government amendment, new clause number 10, was tabled so late that you, Mr. Speaker, have allowed a manuscript amendment to that new clause 10. What the government were doing during the 6 weeks recess, I have absolutely no idea. That they only were able to table the new clause at a minute so late that was to allow a drafting amendment to that clause. That is going to cause considerable controversy. I would imagine that it's going to take up the full 2.5 hours of debate, which brings us into the second 2.5 hours which is to be allowed to us, where we've got to discuss the entitlement to vote, the impartiality of broadcasters, party spending limits, the referendum, campaigning, financial controls, further provisions about the referendum, and crucially, the question on the ballot paper. By all means.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way, but if we don't pass this amendment to the timetable, we finish at 10 o'clock, so we would have less time than is currently proposed. So if we support the right honourable gentleman, we cut our nose off to spite our face.
That's why the honourable member will be able to exercise his best judgment as to whether to support this motion or not. But I think it's reasonable to state the inadequacy of the time being allowed in this timetable motion. There is little or no chance that all of these matters will be adequately and properly discussed, and the honourable member, the right honourable member, knows it I beg your pardon, these things all just take time. I mean, a few years ago, if he'd said I'd be a right honourable member, I'd have shaken my head as well. But who knows what might happen to the honourable member. But it's perfectly proper and reasonable to state that this is an inadequate timetable motion and to appeal to the best judgment of the of the Foreign Secretary to tell us that he has been persuaded by this eloquent appeal to allow a proper length of time for discussion of what are hugely important matters. I think, Mr. Speaker, to facilitate the House finishing before midnight, I shall leave matters there. But this is not. Well, on the other hand, I could move on to past my introduction to say a few things more, but this is not a proper way to discuss a matter of such import. The government has lost control of the timing of the referendum. They've lost control of the conduct of the referendum. They've been turned over on the referendum question, all in the space of the last few weeks. The attempt to rush it through this House and its proceedings has not served the government well. And even at this last-ditch stage, Mr. Speaker, I think it would be well to consider whether or not to come back with a more adequate timetable might serve the interests of this House and probably the interests of the government rather better than they've been doing.
The question is the European Union Referendum Bill Programme number 2 motion as on the order paper. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. If the contrary, no. Division. Clear the lobby. Order! Order.
The question is that the European Referendum Programme motion number 2, as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. The tellers for the ayes, George Hollenberry and Margot James. For the noes, Miriam Fellows and Owen Thompson. Thank you. Vault the doors! Order! Order.
The ayes to the right, 517. The noes to the left, 59.
The ayes to the right, 517. The noes to the left, 59. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
European Union Referendum Bill, as amended in Committee of the Whole House, to be considered.
No. We begin with Government Use Clause 10, with which it will be convenient to consider the new clauses and amendments listed on the selection paper. Minister Luddington to move.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move New Clause 10 and Amendment 53, standing in the name of my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. During committee stage on this bill, I promised to reflect on the concerns that had been raised in the House about the government's proposal to disapply, for the purposes of the EU referendum, Section 125 of the Political Parties, Elections and Referendum Act. The government accepts completely the importance of this referendum being conducted in a way that is both fair and seen to be fair by the partisans on both sides of the debate. And that means in particular that the conduct of both ministers and civil servants must be beyond reproach. We're therefore bringing to the House today proposals that we believe provide the rigorous safeguards that honourable members on all sides of the House wanted to see. And I want to start by reiterating what the Foreign Secretary and I have both said before, namely that the government will not undertake activities during the final 28 days of the campaign that would be seen as the province of the lead campaign organisations. In particular, there should be no question of the government undertaking any paid advertising or promotion, such as billboards, door drops, leafleting, newspaper or digital advertising during that period. And we are... yes.
On the meaning of what he exactly is saying, in our letter to him on behalf of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee in July, we made it clear that it is our view that Section 125 should remain unimpaired, and the government should not be allowed to use the machinery of government, i.e. the resources of the government, for campaigning purposes during the PERDA period, as is already implied in the Civil Service Code. Does the government accept that position?
Well, what I'm going on to say is that we're bringing forward, having studied the letter from my honourable friend, as well as having listened to the views that he and many other honourable members have expressed to us, we're bringing forward amendments today that have three effects. First, we're proposing to reinstate Section 125 and remove the blanket disapplication that is currently in the bill. Second, we're proposing a narrow and limited exemption to permit the government to carry out EU business as usual during that final 28 days of the campaign. And third, we are proposing a power for exemptions to be made to the general prohibition in Section 125, but subject to an affirmative resolution by both houses. In addition, if I can just finish this, then I will give way to my right honourable friend. In addition, those areas of government activity that are permitted by Parliament will also be subject to guidance from the Prime Minister to ministers and from the Cabinet Secretary to civil servants, which we based on the PERDA guidance issued before previous referendum campaigns. As the Cabinet Secretary said when he gave evidence to the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee, civil servants would not, under any circumstances, be permitted to support ministers in doing things that ministers themselves were prohibited by statute from taking part in. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. But why indeed is it necessary for the government to make any amendment to Section 125? The Electoral Commission has carried out statutory reviews of the referendum since 2004, and they have not identified any significant concerns from government or any other parties to the application of Section 125. Why now is the government changing the playing field and insisting on modifications to something which has worked well and the government has used in the past?
We're bringing forward limited exemptions from Section 125 because we believe, and we've received very firm legal advice on this, that the section, if left completely unamended, would pose some genuine difficulties. And I do want to go on and speak in some detail about this, precisely in order to respond to the concerns that my right honourable friend and other colleagues have expressed. But before I go into detail, I will give way to my honourable friend.
Of course, my right honourable friend has had some legal advice, but legal advice can cut both ways, and indeed Speaker's Counsel has made it clear that he doesn't really think that there is any much of a problem with respect to these issues that he's just been describing. But furthermore, not only have the Electoral Commission and Speaker's Counsel made these points quite clear, but if there are to be regulations introduced, they may come in by way of affirmative order after the Act has been enacted, but there will be no further opportunity to amend them because you can only either accept or reject the amendments, the regulations in their entirety, being statutory instruments. Doesn't my right honourable friend agree?
Well, I'll answer my honourable friend's last point. If Parliament is dissatisfied with any regulation that the government might bring forward and put before the House, then the House can reject that statutory instrument, in which case the default position under the package that I'm proposing to the House today is that we would revert to Section 125 without those exemptions being made by regulation at all. So there is that safeguard that it's Parliament itself that has the final say. And I just say to my honourable friend, I hope he will listen when I proceed to try and address some of these concerns in more detail. But I have been present at a number of debates in the House where he has himself said that a legal opinion that he has received is of weight and importance. And I do think the government is entitled to take seriously the arguments that Treasury Counsel have put to us. I'm going to give way to my right honourable learned friend.
I realise I shouldn't be interrupting this flow of people to whom the government is only too anxious to make any concession that's demanded, and who obviously are quite clear about the result of the referendum which they wish to hold, rather more clear about the result than the process, I think, is their concern. But would he confirm that whatever further concessions he's now making, it will still be possible for the ministers in the government to give a clear and authoritative opinion about what, on the basis of the constitutional government of the country, is in the best interests of the United Kingdom in its political future in the world and the prospects for its economy of being in or out of the European Union, and that little things like being allowed to take advice on the factual accuracy of what they're saying on behalf of the government should be allowed.
Order. The right honourable gentleman knows that intervention's got to be short. We can't have speech at this stage. I'll make the decision, and I'm sure that the Minister will want to reply, and if you need to intervene again, please do so, but we can't make speeches with long interventions.
I do apologise, Mr. Speaker, but so far I sense looking round that I am grossly outnumbered as a representative of my views of the Conservative Party compared with a certain section of my right honourable colleagues who are here. But they wish to silence ministers. I do realise that I should control myself, and you're not trying to silence me.
The right honourable gentleman's going to have to sit down a moment. He has been well known as the big beast, and I'm certain he's never worried about the amount of people around him who may not be on the same side. Minister of
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I mean, the answer to my right honourable friend's question is that, of course, the government is going to express its view very clearly at the conclusion of the negotiations and make its recommendation to the country, giving its reasons for so doing. But it is also the case that one of the aspects of the debate about which we have concern is how the government, which would have called the referendum and which will have made a recommendation to the British people, should be able to express that view and answer questions, as he described, in the final 4 weeks. But the debate about PERDA, so-called, about Section 125, refers specifically to the final 28 days of the campaign. I'm going to give way to my honourable friend, the member for St Albans, and I'm going to make some progress.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I'd just ask for a brief comment, really, on the comments that were sent out at just gone 12:30 today by Michael Carpenter, who's the Speaker's Counsel, when he said, "I commented on about all these things in my earlier note to the committee, and Mr Liddington seems to simply repeat the unsound arguments advanced before." Now, for those of us that have concerns, that is a very worrying statement from such a learned counsel.
Well, I think that if my honourable friend had the legal advice that I've had, then she might take a rather different view on this. And many honourable members have said that the PERDA rules that apply during elections have worked well, and I agree with that. And of course, those rules for elections are based entirely upon guidance and convention. They allow for common sense. There's no legal risk involved. Section 125 of the Act is very different, since this is a statutory restriction. And given that the EU referendum debate is, I think we would all accept, going to involve a number of people on both sides of the argument with very deep personal pockets and very passionate views on the subject, I think that the risk of legal challenges during that campaign is real. And what the government is seeking to do through these amendments is to manage that legal risk. And if I can turn first to the provisions of Amendment 53.
With respect, I think this is legalistic claptrap. I don't remember that the Prime Minister was particularly constrained during the general election in arguing his case. What's important is this process is considered to be fair. Why can't we just cut the chase and accept Amendment number 4 put forward by the opposition and have full PERDA and do what we do in general elections, and everybody will think it's fair?
But as I have just said to the House, the position in general elections is that we are governed in respect of what government can and can't do by guidance and by convention, and not by statute, which, with a risk that things can end up before the courts, where there is a dispute. The situation as regards the EU referendum is different, because there is law that is already on the statute book, dating from 2000, and this is not a matter where the element of discretion, the application of common sense can apply in the way that is possible during elections where you are relying on guidance, as I've described. Now, when we come to Amendment 53, we believe that Section 125, as originally drafted in the 2000 Act, would create legal risk and uncertainty for what I might describe as ongoing normal EU business during the final weeks before the referendum. One of the problems with the original section is the breadth of the wording that describes and defines the material that would be caught, and that's laid out in subsection 1b. It imposes a very wide-ranging prohibition on government activity. It bans public bodies and persons, I quote, whose expenses are defrayed wholly or mainly out of public funds, unquote, from publishing material that, I quote again, deals with any of the issues raised by, unquote, the referendum question. Now, unlike the cases of the recent Scottish or AV referendums, the subject matter of the EU referendum cannot simply be avoided during government communications during those last 28 days. The subject of EU membership is broad, so that, for example, a government statement in Brussels on an EU issue under ongoing negotiation could be said to deal with an issue raised by the question of our membership and be caught, therefore, by the restrictions in Section 125. Let me give an example. There are negotiations going on at the moment between the EU and the United States about a free trade deal, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It is perfectly conceivable that at some stage during the last month of our referendum campaign, those negotiations could reach a stage at which there was a discussion between the institutions of the EU and member states of the EU. The British government would have a view on the right outcome. We might want to circulate papers, to lobby using the sort of materials that will be captured by Section 125's definition of publication. And if the section remains unamended, then my concern is that there's a risk that then that gets challenged in court because it could be said to be raised by the referendum campaign, and certainly it is conceivable that one or other or both of the campaign organisations could themselves pray and aid this particular issue as indicating why we should or should not remain members of the EU. And once that happened, it would, I think, certainly be classed as raised by the referendum campaign. Give way to my
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the Minister for giving way, who is, as usual, helpful in explaining his case. But in practice, in reality, if that situation arose, those discussions would not happen in the 28 days when this country is making up its mind whether it wants to be part of the European Union or not. It just would not happen. And the EU is very good at putting off things, and the idea that this is really a reason for changing the law, I find fanciful.
I think that my honourable friend sort of does not understand the extent to which we simply don't know one member state can control the timing of items on the agenda. The timing it depends on what particular illustration one is looking at, but the country that holds the rotating presidency of the European Union will decide what items of business appear on the agenda of council meetings and Coreper meetings. The Commission will decide when to publish new proposals for legislation or amendments to legislation. The European Parliament is a law unto itself. Its sessions are going to continue. Its sessions are going to continue during our referendum campaign, and the British government is likely to want to be circulating published material in the terms of the Preparer Act to try to influence decisions of MEPs in a way that favours our national interest. I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
Can I just get this right? So the Minister's case is some nefarious other government is going to seize the opportunity of the 28-day period to rush something through the European Union. If so, this will be the fastest bout of decision-making in the European Union in history.
No, I'm saying that the European Union is a constant process of negotiation upon a whole range of issues involving ministers and officials from many different government departments, and that in the course of that work, ministers and their officials have to produce materials in order to champion our national interests that would be classed, I believe, could be classed under Section 125 as published material and material whose content would be dealing with an issue raised by the referendum question. Because as well as covering a wide range of content, the 2000 Act gives a very broad definition of the term publish. It defines it as making it available to the public at large or any section of the public in whatever form and by whatever means. That would therefore cover printed material and electronic communications. And yes, I'll give way, and then I want to do what I do. I'm conscious other people do want to speak.
I'm very grateful. Can I give him an example as well of what I'm fearful of? What I can envisage is that if, for example, 2 weeks before the date of the referendum, the Leave campaign was 10 points ahead in that poll, I hope it'll be further ahead, but let's just say for argument's sake it'll be 10 points ahead in the poll. I'm not sure whether the Minister's amendment would deal with the prospect of the government and the European Commission and the German Chancellor all in a mad panic like the clumsy intervention with the Scottish vow, standing up and saying, actually, we hear what you're saying, and you know, if you vote to stay in, we promise we'll address some of these issues. Will the Minister give a commitment now that the government would not engage in that kind of activity?
What he's just described would not be permitted under the amendment that which I'm speaking in support of. But let me just give some examples of the types of business that I believe would be caught under Section 125. We often table minute statements during Council meetings, for example, to set out the UK position on the limits of powers conferred on the EU under the treaties. They're an important point of reference to have on the record, and we obviously make those public. We publish them. We circulate papers to other governments and to the institutions to advocate particular policy outcomes. We did this with some success recently over the digital single market, and if appropriate, we will want to do that with other EU business if that happens to fall within the final 28 days of the campaign.
Well, on that point,
we will.
On that point,
on that point
I've sat as a minister on these telecommunications councils. This is incredibly detailed stuff. Surely you could just wait 28 days to publish your detailed thing. It's perfectly possible. And what we've really, I don't know what hack in the Foreign Office is writing the minister's speech, but it just doesn't add up in the reality of things.
If the decision that is going to be taken, the attempt to reach a consensus at Council, happens to be timed to fall within those 28 days, and I don't think we simply assume that all EU business is going to stop for the last 28 days of our campaign, then of course in those circumstances the government would want to be making its representations, including circulating the type of paper I've described. In a second I'll give way. European Court of Justice judgments are handed down, and Advocate General's opinions are presented, and a timetable that's not within our gift or influence. And again, those are things where the government not only often wishes to comment, but to guide British business and other interest groups on what those judgments or recommendations actually mean. For example, had the recent case on European central bank clearances gone against us, there'd have been an extremely urgent need to write to notify city institutions of the implications of that judgment for them to avoid risks of instability in the markets. I'll give way to honourable gentleman.
I'd like to thank the Minister for giving way. On a point of clarity with the point the Minister raised earlier on, can he assure the House then that in the run-up to the referendum, under his proposals, that we would not see something like the vow that came out just before the Scottish independence referendum? Would the rules outlaw that? Would the rules rule out that kind of thing?
I think from memory, the vow was a commitment by party leaders acting in their party political capacity, so it's a completely different issue. I've not given way to Honourable Friend for Wickham yet. So
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend. I mean, his Amendment 53 changes the scope of the subjects which are within PERDA. Given that I've listened very carefully to his remarks, and he's explained in a very articulate way the functions which might need to be carried out, could he not, instead of moving Amendment 53, accept Amendment 4, go back to normal PERDA, and instead bring forward in statutory instruments exemptions that are functional rather than being related to subjects?
We'd all agree. Yeah. I mean, let me come on to the detail of what we're proposing, because I hope to answer my honourable friend's points in that.
I think my honourable friend's so desperate to give way to everything that's put to him, I don't think I'm his friend at all. In my opinion, my right honourable friend has given way already far too much. But I quite understand why, because of the opportunism of the opposition parties who don't agree with the hardline Eurosceptics in my party, but are determined to vote against with our rebels in order to force this preposterous situation. Can my right honourable member assure me, if 2 weeks before the campaign is ended, the No campaign suddenly announced some decisions been taken to finish health and safety or food safety regulations in some key area, a judgment of the Just European Court has meant that hundreds will die and the horticultural industry will be wiped out, that a minister would be allowed in these complex trade matters on TTIP and so on, to consult officials and give some authoritative, clear description of what the decision or what the proposal actually is. I don't think most of our right-wing newspapers would report what the Minister said, factually based on factual advice, but could we leave open the possibility that the Minister might at least be able to consult the experts on the negotiations before he gives statements on behalf of the government?
Well, the straight answer to my right honourable friend is that Amendment 53 does not address the particular dilemma that he described, because Amendment 53 does not grant such an exemption from the overall restrictions in Section 125. I'm going to give way to the honourable lady, but then I am going to make some progress and not give way again for time.
That's very good, because in fact I have, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have intervened to try and throw the Minister a lifeline. It's a suggestion that he may wish to grasp. Both sides want to be sure that the referendum is fair. I think we're all agreed on that. Both sides, I would hope, agree that the Electoral Commission is independent, impartial, very professional in what it does in organising referendums. With the amendment clause 10, the government is drafted in such a way that the only duty on the Minister who is going to bring forward regulations to exclude or make exclusions from PERDA is that they consult with the Electoral Commission. Change the word consult, seek the approval of the Electoral Commission, I would suggest.
Well, let me come on to new clause 10 in a few moments. I want to finish dealing with Amendment 53 first, because the arguments raised by new clause 10 are slightly different in character. But I want to deal with the point that my honourable friend for Wickham made. First of all, what is it that we are actually proposing in the content of Amendment 53? What it does is reapply Section 125 for the purposes of the referendum, but with limited modifications to enable the government to transact wider EU business without the legal risks that I've described. We have reproduced in the list of prohibitions in Amendment 53 some of the things taken directly from the current 125. For example, the prohibition on the government encouraging people to vote in the referendum. That is, I think, word for word, a replication of what is in the current Section 125. The key